The Sum of Perfection Book 2. Second Book of the Sum of Perfection. Or The Abstract of the Perfect Magisterium. Written by Geber. Preface. Division of this second book into 3 parts. After having dealt with the principles of the Magisterium in the preceding book, it only remains for us to show, as we have promised, in what consists the accomplishment of our art, by a discourse which explains it clearly. Now the knowledge of perfection consists of 3 things. For we must first examine the things by means of which we can more easily discover in what consists the perfection of our work. In the second place, we have to examine what is the medicine which must necessarily give perfection, and to inquire in what it can best be found, and whence it can most soon be drawn, in order to perfect the imperfect in any way whatsoever. Finally, we must consider the artifices, by means of which we may know whether perfection is true and accomplished. When we have dealt sufficiently with these 3 things, we shall have given an idea and full knowledge of perfection, so much as is necessary for our art. First part of the second book. Chapter 1. Of the knowledge of the things by which one can discover the possibility of perfection, and the manner of doing it. One cannot know how the transmutation of imperfect bodies and quicksilver takes place, if one does not first have a true knowledge of their nature, and if one does not know what their roots and principles are. I will therefore first give the knowledge of the principles of bodies or metals, by declaring what they do by their own causes, and what they have in them, good and bad. Then I will show what are the natures and essences of all these bodies, with all their properties, and I will tell the causes of their imperfection, and those of their perfection, which I will prove by manifest experiments. Chapter 2. Of the nature of sulfur and arsenic. It is necessary before all things to know the nature of the spirits, that is to say of sulfur, arsenic and quicksilver, because these are the principles of bodies. I have said before that sulfur and arsenic are fat from the earth. Which is so true that it is evidently seen by the ease that sulfur and arsenic have in igniting and melting in fire, there being only oils and fats, and what is of their nature, which ignites and melts easily by heat. Which shows us that sulfur, and arsenic which resembles it, have in themselves 2 causes of corruption or imperfection, which are one an inflammable substance, and the other feces, or earthly impurities. And thus there is only their middle substance, which holds the middle between the inflammable and the impure, which can serve to give perfection. Now the reason why the inflammable substance and the impure feces of these 2 spirits cause corruption and imperfection, it is primarily with regard to the earthly and gross feces, that they prevent fusion and penetration. And as for the inflammable substance, it is that it cannot sustain fire, nor consequently give fixity, and that it is she who, being joined with the bodies, gives them darkness of whatever kind. There is therefore only the middle substance of these 2 spirits which can be the cause of perfection, because it is not so earthly that it cannot enter easily, which comes from the fact that it is very melting, and that its subtle parts are not so volatile that they do not remain long enough in the fire to perform their action on the bodies and change them. This middle substance cannot, however, communicate perfection to the imperfect metals nor to quicksilver, if it is not first made fixed. For not being fixed by itself, although it does not first flee from the fire, and remains there long enough to make an impression on the bodies, the change however that it makes on these bodies is not stable, not remaining always, and not being foolproof. It follows from what we have just said, that the artist must necessarily separate the middle substance from sulfur and arsenic to make use of it in our art. What some thought impossible, because this middle substance is strongly mixed and united with a natural union with the other parts of these 2 spirits. But these people are obviously saying the opposite of what they can do. Because if they calcine the sulfur, I do not say strongly, but until it can no longer melt or ignite, it is certain that this calcination cannot be done without there being separation of its parts. Because the sulfur remaining in its natural composition, and in its simple substance, that is to say such as it was produced by nature, it must necessarily ignite and burn. And consequently no longer burning, it is necessary that by the separation that the artifice has made of the different substances which are in it, its flammable part has been detached and separated from the non-flammable part. That is why, if it is possible that by calcining the sulfur, one can come so far as to remove all that it has that is inflammable, as one can, experience must convince these people that one can absolutely separate the different parts of the sulfur from each other. But because they did not have enough skill to make this separation, they are persuaded that it is not possible. And that there is in it, at most, only one of its parts which can be useful there. And I have taught by what artifice one can make the separation of this part from the others. As for arsenic, because in the root and the principle of its composition, there have been several of its inflammable parts which have been dissipated by the action of nature, which has mixed it, it is not so difficult to make the separation of its parts, as of that of sulfur. But arsenic can only be a tincture for white, like sulfur for red. This is why it is necessary to apply especially to make skillfully the separation of the parts of sulfur, as having to be of greater utility. There were several of its inflammable parts which were dissipated by the action of nature, which made the mixture of it, it is not so difficult to make the separation of its parts, than of that of sulfur. But arsenic can only be a tincture for white, like sulfur for red. This is why it is necessary to apply especially to make skillfully the separation of the parts of sulfur, as having to be of greater utility. There were several of its inflammable parts which were dissipated by the action of nature, which made the mixture of it, it is not so difficult to make the separation of its parts, than of that of sulfur. But arsenic can only be a tincture for white, like sulfur for red. This is why it is necessary to apply especially to make skillfully the separation of the parts of sulfur, as having to be of greater utility. Chapter 3. Of the nature of mercury or quicksilver. The argent vive still has superfluities that must be removed. For it has two causes of imperfection, one is an earthly, impure substance, and the other a superfluous and volatile moisture or wateriness, which evaporates in fire, but does not catch fire. Some have believed, however, that quicksilver has no superfluous and impure earthliness, but they are not right, experience showing that it has a lot of lividity or blackness, and that its whiteness is not pure enough, nor very clear, which can only come from an impure earth. Besides that you don't have to be a great artist to draw from it a black earth similar to dregs. Because to do it, you just have to wash it in the way that I will say next. But as the argent vive can be perfected in two ways, one by making a medicine of it, and the other by giving it perfection by means of a medicine, it must also be prepared and purified in two different ways. The first, which is the one we are talking about, is done by sublimation, in order to make it a medicine. The other way we will talk about next is by lotion, i.e. washing it, and that is to coagulate it. Thus, for mercury to be able to make the elixir, or the medicine which gives perfection, one must first of all purify it well by the sublimation of all these feces and coarse impurities, so that coming to make the projection of it on the imperfect bodies, it does not communicate to them a leaden and livid color. And it is also necessary to remove its volatile aquosity from it, for fear that the medicine which one would make of it would not evaporate and would not go away all in smoke in the projection. Because there is in it only this middle substance alone which has this property of neither burning nor being consumed in fire, and which prevents the bodies to which it is united, from being neither burned nor consumed, and that besides that it remains and perseveres in the fire, without evaporating, and that finally it gives fixity to what is volatile. And even this is confirmed by experience. For we see that quicksilver attaches itself more strongly, and unites itself more perfectly, first with other quicksilver, then with gold, and after gold with silver. Which obviously shows that gold and silver, which are the two perfect metals, participate more in the nature of quicksilver than the other metallic bodies which we judge by this not to have so much conformity with it, and which we truly find to be less participants in its nature. Moreover, we see that all that remains longer in the fire, and that which resists it better without being burned, has the most argent quick. And thus the argent quick is what gives perfection, and what prevents metallic bodies from burning, and from being consumed in the fire, which is the last degree. And the greatest mark of perfection. The second degree, or means of purifying the argent vive, is used to give it coagulation. To do this, you only have to wash it for a whole day, in order to remove from it by this means what is earthly and impure in it. This is how it is. One takes a dish of earth, in which one puts the argent vive which one wishes to purify. We then put the dish on a very low heat, where we hold it without it boiling. You must constantly stir the argent quick with your finger, on the bottom of the dish, so that it breaks down into very small parts, as if it were a very subtle white powder, continuing to stir constantly, until all the vinegar has evaporated, and may quicksilver reunite and return to its first form. After which it is washed with water, and all the black dirt which comes out of it which remains attached to the dish is thrown away. We repeat this operation until we see that the argent vive has completely lost its livid and blackish color, that its terrestrialities cause it, and that it becomes of a beautiful light blue, mixed with an azure color, like that of the heavens. Because then we can say that it has been perfectly washed. The argent quick being in this state, it is necessary to make the projection above of the medicine, which has the virtue of coagulating it, and it will coagulate into powder, which will transmute the imperfect bodies into sun and moon, according to whether the medicine which will coagulate it, and of which we will speak hereafter, will have been prepared. We must infer from what I have just said that quicksilver, taken as it came out of the mine, does not have the virtue of perfecting imperfect bodies or metals, but that what can give this perfection is something that is drawn and made from it by our artifice. The same can be said of sulfur and arsenic, which is similar to sulfur. It must not therefore be imagined that we can naturally do what nature does in the production of these things, but we imitate her only by our natural artifice, by means of which we raise them to be able to give perfection to imperfect bodies. It is a thing which is drawn and made from him by our artifice. The same can be said of sulfur and arsenic, which is similar to sulfur. It must not therefore be imagined that we can naturally do what nature does in the production of these things, but we imitate her only by our natural artifice, by means of which we raise them to be able to give perfection to imperfect bodies. It is a thing which is drawn and made from him by our artifice. The same can be said of sulfur and arsenic, which is similar to sulfur. It must not therefore be imagined that we can naturally do what nature does in the production of these things, but we imitate her only by our natural artifice, by means of which we raise them to be able to give perfection to imperfect bodies. Chapter 4. On the nature of marcasite, magnesia and tutti. It remains for us to speak again in particular of the other spirits, that is to say of the marcasite, the magnesia and the tutti, which make a strong impression on the bodies. It is therefore necessary to say what is their nature, considering it by its causes, and by the experiences that one has of it. Marcasite is composed of two substances, one of which is a mortified quicksilver, and which approaches fixity, and the other is an addustible sulfur, that is to say, which ignites and burns. And certainly experience clearly shows that marcasite has a sulfur in it. Because when one comes to sublimate it, it comes out and it rises visibly a sulphureous substance which burns. And without sublimating it, one can still notice by another means that marcasite has sulfur. For if we put it on the fire to make it blush, she does not blush until she is inflamed by the adustion of her sulfur. Besides, it appears evidently that it also has quicksilver because it gives copper the whiteness of real silver, as does quicksilver itself. Besides that when you sublimate it, you see that it takes on the color of celestial blue, and she obviously has a metallic glow. Which shows those who perform these operations on it, that it has in itself and in its root the two substances of sulfur and quicksilver. It is easy to prove by the same experiments that magnesia is composed of a duller and more cloudy sulfur of a more earthy and grimier argent quick, and that its sulfur is more fixed and less inflammable than that of marcasite, and that thus she has more conformity than she with the nature of Mars. For the tutti, it is only a smoke of the white bodies. What is known by obvious experience? For first of all, if one makes a projection of the two fumes which come out of the bodies of Jupiter and Venus, and which attach themselves jointly to the walls of the furnaces of the founders, and of those who work on these two metals, the mixture of these two fumes makes the same impression and the same effect as the tutti. Secondly, because this smoke of the metals, nor the tutti either, do not return to a body, if one and the other are not mixed with some metal. Now, as the tutti is the smoke of the white bodies, it does not give the orange tincture to the white bodies, but only to the red bodies or metals, because orange is nothing but a proportionate mixture of red and white. For the rest, the subtle tutti as she is, penetrates deeply into the bodies, and in this way she alters and changes them better than the metal from which she came. And this change bears better examination, provided that it is done with the slightest bit of artifice, in the manner that I have already said. Chapter 5. Of the nature of the sun. It is now necessary to speak in depth of the metallic bodies, and to discover their hidden essence, by resuming the discourse that we made of them in the preceding book, to which we will add many necessary things. We will therefore speak first of the sun, then of the moon, and then of the other metallic bodies, and we will say all that will be necessary to give knowledge of them. And in all this we will put forward nothing that we do not prove by the experiments that can be made of it. And as this sulfur is not equally colored, and some are more dyed than the other, hence it is that there is also some gold which is necessarily more yellow, and some which is less so. Now it is evident that gold is formed of the most subtle substance of argent quick, because argent quick, which only attaches itself to that which is of its own nature, and which does not receive all that is not, attaches itself easily and unites strongly with gold, so that it seems to embrace it. b. No other proof is needed to show that this substance of quicksilver, from which gold is formed, is clear and distinct, than the splendor and brilliancy of gold, which shines as well at night as in broad daylight. This same quicksilver must also necessarily be fixed, and without any mixture of impure and combustible sulfur, because gold neither diminishes nor ignites in fire, although it is made red there and melted there. Its sulfur is tingent, that is to say, it tints quicksilver, because the mineral sulfur being mixed with the vulgar quicksilver, and being sublimated with it, communicates to it a red color which is what is called artificial cinnabar, and because this same sulfur being amalgamated with the metallic bodies, and sublimated with them at high fire, so that what is more subtle in the metals is elevated and sublimated. With him, this sublimation becomes very yellow. It is therefore only the pure substance of sulfur which makes a clear and pure color in the metals. And it is consequently the impure sulfur which gives them an impure and imperfect color. One has only to consider gold to be persuaded that it is yellow, and he who would doubt it would be blind. The matter of the essence of gold is therefore none other than the very subtle and pure substance of quicksilver, which has been fixed by the mixture and union of the very subtle and fixed matter of incombustible sulfur, which has a red and clear tincture. But there is nevertheless more quicksilver than sulfur in the composition of gold. What is known by the ease with which argent quick attaches itself to gold, which sulfur does not. Thus, if we want to make some alteration and some change in the imperfect metals, we must propose gold as a model of what we must do, and always try to reduce these metals to the same equality as that of gold. We have previously taught the means. Besides, because the parts, of which gold was first formed, were subtle and fixed, they also contracted and condensed a great deal, and this is what makes gold so heavy. Moreover, as nature took a long time to cook and digest it, by a very temperate heat, its parts, the rawest and most volatile, exhaled slowly and little by little, and thus it was thickened perfectly and as it should be, in the last mixture which was made of its principles, and this is what causes it to melt only after having blushed. It is seen, from what we have just said, that the perfection of metals depends on three things. First, from the large amount of their quicksilver. Secondly, of the uniformity and equality of their substances, which is made by an equal and well-proportioned mixture of their principles. And in the third place, that they harden and thicken by a long and moderate digestion. And thus the impurity and imperfection of the metals will come from too much sulfur, from the diversity of substance, and from a hasty digestion which hardens and thickens them too suddenly. Because sulfur, which enters into the composition of metals, is either fixed, and is not all combustible, or it is entirely. Either this sulfur is volatile, and it is either as sulfur, or not as sulfur. Or it is partly volatile and partly fixed. Moreover, this sulfur, or is sulfur only in part, or in part it is not. And what is sulfur is either entirely pure or entirely impure. Either there is only half of it impure, or there is very little. The sulfur is still or in great quantity, and so it dominates the quicksilver, or there is little of it, and the quicksilver has the upper hand. Or these two principles are so well proportioned that there is not more of one than the other. Finally, either this sulfur is white, or it is red, or it holds the middle between these two colors. And it is this different mixture of these two principles which necessarily produces in nature different metallic bodies, and other similar bodies, such as the metal ions. We are going to examine this difference of the metals, and we will report the causes and the properties of it, which we will prove by sensible experiments. Chapter 6. From the nature of the moon. We said in the preceding chapter that gold is formed when a pure, fixed, red and clear sulfur mixes in such a way with a pure and clean quicksilver, that not only does the sulfur not dominate, but the quicksilver is there in greater quantity. That if a clean, fixed, white sulfur, of a pure and clear whiteness, comes to mingle with a pure, fixed and clear quicksilver, and the sulfur does not dominate, but there is a little more quicksilver, there will be formed from it silver, which is a perfect metal, but yet less pure and coarser than is gold. For its parts are not so tight as those of gold, and therefore it is not so heavy as gold. Silver is not yet so fixed as gold, as it appears in that it diminishes in fire, which is a sign that its sulfur is not quite fixed or incombustible, since it ignites a little when this metal is made to redden in the fire. Now when I say that the sulfur of silver is not fixed, this must be understood in relation to that of gold, not being impossible that the same sulfur is fixed, if we compare it with another which is less so, and that it is not fixed, if we consider it in relation to another which is more so. It is in this sense that with respect to gold, the sulfur of the moon is not fixed, but incombustible, and that by comparing silver with the metals which are imperfect, its sulfur is fixed and incombustible. Since it ignites a little when this metal is made to redden in the fire. Now when I say that the sulfur of silver is not fixed, this must be understood in relation to that of gold, not being impossible that the same sulfur is fixed, if we compare it with another which is less so, and that it is not fixed, if we consider it in relation to another which is more so. It is in this sense that with respect to gold, the sulfur of the moon is not fixed, but incombustible, and that by comparing silver with the metals which are imperfect, its sulfur is fixed and incombustible. Since it ignites a little when this metal is made to redden in the fire. Now when I say that the sulfur of silver is not fixed, this must be understood in relation to that of gold, not being impossible that the same sulfur is fixed, if we compare it with another which is less so, and that it is not fixed, if we consider it in relation to another which is more so. It is in this sense that with respect to gold, the sulfur of the moon is not fixed, but incombustible, and that by comparing silver with the metals which are imperfect, its sulfur is fixed and incombustible. If we compare it with another which is less so, and it is not fixed, if we consider it in relation to another which is more so. It is in this sense that with respect to gold, the sulfur of the moon is not fixed, but incombustible, and that by comparing silver with the metals which are imperfect, its sulfur is fixed and incombustible. If we compare it with another which is less so, and it is not fixed, if we consider it in relation to another which is more so. It is in this sense that with respect to gold, the sulfur of the moon is not fixed, but incombustible, and that by comparing silver with the metals which are imperfect, its sulfur is fixed and incombustible. Chapter 7. Of the nature of Mars, in which is treated of the effects of sulfur and mercury, and of the causes of the corruption and perfection of metals. If a fixed and earthly sulfur is found mixed with a quicksilver which is equally fixed and earthly, and if both have an impure and livid or blackish whiteness, and if in the composition there is much more of this fixed sulfur than of quicksilver, of this mixture iron is made. And because the excess of the fixed sulfur in the composition of the metals prevents their fusion, it follows from there that the fixed sulfur does not melt so quickly as does the argent vive, whereas that which is not fixed rather melts. This clearly shows us why some metals melt easily and quickly, and how it comes about that there are others which are very long and very difficult to melt. Because those who have the most fixed sulfur melt more slowly, and those with the most addustible sulfur melt sooner. What it is very easy to show. Because for proof that sulfur fixes metals, is what makes them more difficult to melt, it is that the sulfur itself can never become fixed if it is not calcined, and when it is calcined it is no longer fusible. And consequently it is the fixed sulfur of the metals which prevents their fusion. Now I know by experience that sulfur cannot be fixed if it is not calcined. Because having tried to fix it without having calcined it, I found that it was still volatile, and fled away until it was changed into an earth like lime. But it is not so with quicksilver, which can be made fixed, and by changing it into earth, and without the need to change it. We fix it and soon change it into earth, if we hasten to make its fixation, sublimating it hastily. And it is fixed all the same by a slow and repeated sublimation, without it being changed into earth, since it then melts just like a metal. And this I know for having fixed it in these two ways, one hastened and hurried, until its moisture was consumed, and the other slow, sublimating it several times gently and little by little. I have seen it and I have found it, I say, by experience, as I say. Now the reason why this is done is that the substance of quicksilver is viscous and tight. We see that it is viscous by the separation which is made of it into very small parts, when you soak it up and mix it with other things. For its viscosity then appears evidently, because, although it is separated into an infinity of very small parts, it nevertheless attaches itself, and it unites strongly with that with which it is mixed. There is no one who does not see all the same that his substance is solid and very tight. For it is only necessary to consider and weigh it, and one will find that it is so heavy, when it is all pure, that it weighs more than gold itself. Besides, its composition is very strong, as we have already said above, because of the very exact mixture of its two principles. And hence, the quicksilver can be fixed without its moisture being consumed, and without it being changed into earth. For its parts being well united together, and its composition being consequently very strong, its parts coming to be still more tightened by the action of the fire, that makes it resist the fire, which could no longer destroy it in this state, and the flame itself, however great and violent it may be, no longer has a hold on it, and it can neither penetrate it nor reduce it to smoke, because it is too tight to be able to be rarefied, and moreover it cannot be burned, having no inflammable sulfur, which is what makes bodies edible, or capable of being burned and consumed by fire. We have thus discovered two admirable secrets. 1. Why fire destroys metals. And of this we find three causes. The first is an addustible sulfur which is enclosed in the depths of their substance, which comes to be burned, diminishes this substance by resolving it into smoke, until he has entirely consumed it, whatever quantity the metals have of well-fixed and well-fusible quicksilver. The second cause is external, and it is the violence of the flaming fire, which we increase and which we always maintain very strong, and which continually touching the metals, melts them, penetrates them and resolves them into smoke, however fixed they may be. The last cause is the calcination of metals, which rarefies them by separating their parts from each other. For this estrangement gives light to the flame, which penetrates them by this means, and which reduces them to smoke, however perfect they may be. That if these three causes of the destruction of metals concur and are found together, it is certain that they will be easily destroyed. But if any are missing, they will be more difficult to destroy in proportion as these causes are less. For nothing of all that causes the destruction and annihilation of metals being able to divide quicksilver into its principles, but either all its substance going away from above the fire, or remaining there entirely, without anything being lost, it is necessary that the cause of the perfection of metals be in quicksilver. Let us therefore praise and bless God who created this quicksilver, and who gave it a substance and properties that are not found in anything else in nature. So that we can find in this substance of quicksilver the perfection, by a certain artifice, which is found in it by a nearby power. For it is the argent-quick who overcomes the fire, and whom the fire cannot conquer. On the contrary, he rests and he delights in remaining in the fire. Chapter 8. Of the nature of Venus or copper. Let us now resume our discourse. When the sulfur is impure, coarse, red, livid, the greater part of it is fixed, and the lesser not fixed, and is mixed with a coarse and impure quicksilver, so that there is little more nor little less of one than the other. From this mixture copper is formed. And it is easy to judge that to make this metal, these two principles must be mixed in this way, if we consider the effects that they produce naturally in it. For when it is made red in the fire, a flame is seen to issue from it, like that produced by sulfur, which is a mark that it has a sulfur which is not fixed. Besides that this metal decreases in the fire, by the evaporation which is made of this bad sulfur. We know, however, that it has a lot of fixed sulfur, because by often reddening it in the fire, and burning it, after that it does not melt so easily, and it becomes harder, which can only come from the fact that it has a lot of fixed sulfur. Moreover, it appears by the color of this metal that its sulfur is red, livid, impure, and that it is mixed with a quicksilver, impure and full of grime. So we don't need any other proof to verify it. From there we can do an experiment that will reveal a secret to us. For since all that is changed in the earth by the action of heat dissolves easily, and is reduced to water, and this is done because the fire makes more subtle the parts on which it acts, it follows that, however subtle a thing is naturally, it becomes even more so if it is reduced to this nature of earth, by calcination, and if it dissolves better. And hence things dissolve better in proportion as they are more subtle and more calcined. Which shows what is the cause of the corruption and impurity of Mars and Venus, and that it comes only from the quantity they have of fixed and non-fixed sulfur, or addustible, Venus having more addustible than Mars, and Mars more fixed than Venus. When, therefore, the fixed sulfur of these two metals has become still more fixed, by the heat of the fire, its parts become more subtle, and what is disposed in it to dissolve dissolves, as is seen when these two metals are exposed to the vapor of vinegar. For this vapor brings out on their surface, like a flower, the luminosity, that is to say the luminous parts, of their sulfur, by means of the heat which comes from this vapor, and which subtilizes the superficial parts, and the closest to these metals. And if you boil these two bodies in some pontic or salt water, you will find that much will be dissolved by this boiling. And if we go into the minds of these two metals, we will see the luminosity which dissolves in them distill and stick to them, which changes and dissolves into water, because of its ponticity or salinity, and the facility with which it dissolves. For there is nothing pontic or salty, and which dissolves easily but alum, and which comes from its nature. And which is eatable, which they have enclosed within themselves. And although Venus has much of this sulfur, and Mars has little, nevertheless, as what it has is almost fixed, it is the cause that Mars cannot be deprived of this blackness. And that on the contrary the fixed sulfur has no fusion, and that it prevents it. But this is not the case with fixed quicksilver. Because whatever fixity he has, he does not flee for that reason that he does not make fusion, nor that he prevents it from being made. I can bear witness to this truth. For by whatever means I could think of to make the fusion, I could never hold the molten sulfur after I fixed it. Whereas having fixed quicksilver, after having sublimated it several times with fixed sulfur, this sulfur has been by this means rendered very fusible. Which obviously shows that the more the bodies or metals have of quicksilver, the more perfect they are, and that those who have less, also have less perfection. This is why I warn you that, to do the Magisterium, you must ensure in all your operations, that in the composition there is always more quicksilver than sulfur. And that if you can do the work of quicksilver all by yourself, you will have found the perfection which is most precious, and which far surpasses all that nature can make most perfect. Because by it you will be able to purify the imperfect bodies, even in their depth, and in their interior, what nature cannot do. Now we must judge that the bodies which have the most argent vivant are the most perfect, because they receive the argent vivant more easily than the others, and they attach themselves better to it. For we see that perfect bodies kindly receive quicksilver as being of their same nature. We see by the things we have said above, that in bodies or metals, there are two kinds of sulfur. One which is hidden in the depth of quicksilver, and which is there from the beginning of its conformation, and the other which arises in quicksilver after it is already made. The latter can only be taken away from it with great difficulty, but it is impossible to take the former away from it by means of fire, of whatever artifice and whatever operation one does for that, because this sulfur is intimately united with him, and because he was born with him. Experience confirms what we have just said. For we see that fire destroys the addustible sulfur of metals, but it cannot remove their fixed sulfur. Thus, when we say that one can purify the metals by calcining them, and by making them take again body, that must understand that one can strip them of their terrestrial substance, which is not united intimately with them, nor in the depth of their nature. For to claim by means of fire, to separate things which are intimately united, that cannot be, except by means of the medicine of quicksilver, which would cover and temper this earth or this sulfur, or which would separate it from the compound. For we separate in two ways the terrestrial or sulphureous substance, which is intimately united to the nature of the body or of the metal. Firstly by the sublimation that one makes of it with tusha and marcasite, which raise the substance of quicksilver, and leave the sulfur below. Which they do by the resemblance they have, as much with quicksilver as with sulfur, being only two fumes which are composed of quicksilver and sulfur, but which have much more of the former than of the latter. And this is seen by experience, because if you mix them by a strong and prompt fusion with the bodies, the spirits they contain will carry the bodies with them, and reduce them to smoke. And thus these two spirits separate from the bodies this sulphureous earth. Secondly, one can separate this terrestrial substance, which is in the metal, by washing it and amalgamating it with the quicksilver, as we have said above. And the reason is because the quicksilver attaches and retains only what is of its nature, and leaves all that is not. Chapter 9. From the nature of Jupiter or tin. Let us return to the composition of metals. If sulfur, which is one of its principles, has a little fixity, if it has an impure whiteness, and if it has less of it than quicksilver, if quicksilver is impure, partly fixed and partly volatile, and if it has only an impure and imperfect whiteness, tin will be made from this mixture. That is to say, to remove its impurities, show that it is composed in this way. Because by calcining it, one smells the bad smell of the sulfur which comes out of it, which marks that it has a non-fixed or addustible sulfur. That if when exhaled, this sulfur does not make a blue flame like that which common sulfur does, when it is burned, it does not follow for that it is fixed, because that does not come from its fixity, but from the fact that in the composition of this metal, there is much more quicksilver, which by its humidity prevents this sulfur from burning so visibly that it can make a flame. One of these sulfurs is combustible, since when it is calcined, it gives off the same odor as common sulfur. The other sulfur, which is more fixed, and which for this reason does not have a bad smell like the first, is seen in the lime of this metal, which remains in the fire without being burned or consumed. One notices all the same two argent quicks in the tin, one which is not fixed, and which gives it the jack, and the other fixed, which does not give it any. Experience makes us see the first. For before the tin is charred it has the jack, and after being charred 3 times it has it no more. Which is because his volatile quicksilver, which was jacking up, exhaled into the calcination. Now it is certain that it is the volatile quicksilver of tin which gives it the jack. For if lead is washed with quicksilver, and after having washed it, it is melted with a fire, which is not stronger than it must be to melt the lead, there will remain a part of quicksilver with the lead, which will give it the jack, and will change it into tin. This is seen all the same in the transmutation which is made of tin into lead. For if we calcine several times the tin with the lead, and if we give it a proper fire to make it resume body, it will convert to lead. And this transmutation will be done more easily if, when the tin is in fusion, one removes from it the films which form above, and if one calcines them with strong fire. But you will still be assured that these different substances meet in tin if you can find the invention to preserve it in proper vessels for that, and to make the separation of these substances, by means of a certain degree of fire, as I have done, after having discovered it with much trouble and work. Which made me know that I had been right to believe that this metal was composed of all these different substances. That if you ask me what remains of tin, after it has been stripped of these two substances, which are not fixed, that is to say, after having taken away its combustible sulfur and its volatile mercury, I am going to tell you, in order to let you know perfectly the composition of this metal. Know then that after this there remains a livid body, heavy as lead, but which is whiter. Thus it is a very pure lead, in the composition of which the two principles, quicksilver and sulfur, are equally fixed, although they are not both equal in quantity, because there is more quicksilver in this composition, as may be known by the ease with which quicksilver enters it, just as it is in its nature. Which wouldn't be so easy if the quicksilver weren't there in greater quantities. It is for this reason that quicksilver attaches itself to Mars only by a very great artifice, nor to Venus either, because of the little quicksilver that these two metals have in their composition. Nevertheless Venus, having more quicksilver than Mars, as is seen in her being easy to melt, whereas Mars melts only with extreme difficulty, quicksilver, therefore, should attach itself only with great difficulty to Mars, and more easily to Venus. Now, when I said that in this body, which I called very pure lead, the two substances which make up its composition were fixed, I meant that their fixation approached a strong fixation, and not that they remained always fixed in any event. And as proof of this, if we calcine this very pure lead, and whether one holds the calcination, or the lime, in a violent fire, this fire will not separate these two principles from one another, but the substance of this body will rise, and will sublimate entirely, although nevertheless more purified than it was. Besides, the substance of the addustible sulfur is easier to separate in tin than in lead, as it is seen in that Jupiter hardens, that he calcines, and that his luster increases easily. Which has made known to us that its addustible sulfur and its volatile mercury, which are the two things which corrupt and infect it, are not of its first composition, nor exactly united with its principles, but that they arise after it is already formed. And that's why we can easily separate them, and that the various changes which one gives to this metal, that is to say its modification, its hardening and its fixation, are not more promptly than in lead. And it is easy to guess why this is done, if one considers all that I have said above, and the particular remark that I made. Because after having calcined it and put it back in body, having given it a strong and violent fire, I saw, by the vapors which rise in its sublimation, that it became orange, which is a property of sulfur which is fixed, and which suffers calcination. So much so that from this experience, which I found very assured, and which confirmed me in my opinion, I judged that this metal had a lot of fixed sulfur in its composition. This is why I urge all those who will want to know the truth in our science, to work carefully to discover, and to be convinced of all that I have just advanced, and not to cease their research and their study, until they have acquired the knowledge of the principles of the bodies and the properties of the spirits, and that they have an entire certainty, without contenting themselves with simple conjectures. I give them the facility by the way in which I taught it in this book, having said it sufficiently, and as much as it is necessary for our art. Until they have acquired the knowledge of the principles of bodies and the properties of spirits, and have an entire certainty of them, without contenting themselves with mere conjectures. I give them the facility by the way in which I taught it in this book, having said it sufficiently, and as much as it is necessary for our art. Until they have acquired the knowledge of the principles of bodies and the properties of spirits, and have an entire certainty of them, without contenting themselves with mere conjectures. I give them the facility by the way in which I taught it in this book, having said it sufficiently, and as much as it is necessary for our art. Chapter 10. Of the nature of Saturn, or of lead. It only remains for us to describe Saturn. This metal is in no way different from Jupiter, except that its substance is more impure, because it is composed of a quicksilver and a coarser sulfur, and its combustible sulfur is more strongly attached to the quicksilver substance than it is in Jupiter. And finally that there is more fixed sulfur in its composition. We are going to report the causes, and prove them by convincing experiments. First, it is only necessary to consider these two metals to judge that Saturn has more earthiness and feces than Jupiter. It still appears in that the first time Saturn calcines more easily than Jupiter. Which is a mark that he has a lot more earthiness. For experience shows us that bodies which have the most earthiness burn more easily, and that those who have less of it are more difficult to perfectly calcine the sun. Finally, it is verified that Saturn has more earthiness and feces than Jupiter, in that its blackness and its impurity are not purified nor go away by calcining it, and by putting it back into the body several times, as we see that this is done in Jupiter. This is a proof that Saturn has much more impurity in the principles of its composition. Secondly, it is easy to judge that all that Saturn has of combustible sulfur is more strongly united with the substance of its quicksilver than it is in Jupiter. Because by evaporation it cannot separate so little of this bad sulfur, provided that the quantity is a little considerable, that it does not appear of an orange color and very tinted, besides that what remains even of this sulfur at the bottom of the vessel is of the same color. Thus one of three things must necessarily be one, either that Saturn should have no sulfur which is combustible, or that there are very few, or finally that what it has of it is strongly united with the fixed sulfur in its first composition. Now there can be no doubt that not only does it have a bad sulfur, and that it does not have a little of it, but even that it has a lot of it, since it has the smell of this sulfur, that it retains this odor for a long time, and that it is very difficult to make it lose it. Which obviously made us know that his combustible sulfur is assuredly united very exactly with his incombustible sulfur, which approaches very much to the nature of the fixed sulfur, so that these two sulfur being mixed and united with his quicksilver, they all together form but one single homogeneous substance, that is to say, which is all of the same nature. And from there comes that when the nature of the combustible sulfur of this metal comes to rise, it necessarily rises with the incombustible sulfur, having only it which can make the color orange. We said in the third place that there is more incombustible sulfur in Saturn than in Jupiter. What is so true that in the preparation that one gives to the lime of these two metals, by holding them one and the other for some time in the fire, we see that that of Saturn becomes entirely orange, whereas that of Jupiter only whitens. This has made known to us the cause for which Jupiter hardens rather by calcination, and why it does not so easily lose the facility which it has for melting which Saturn does. Because that comes from the fact that Saturn has more fixed sulfur and argent quick, which is what makes the hardness of the metals. Now there are two things which make and which give fusion, the argent quick and the addustible sulfur. One of which is quicksilver, is sufficient to give a perfect fusion, in whatever degree of fire it may be, either that the metals must blush before melting, or that they can be melted without it. That is why, as in Jupiter there is a lot of quicksilver which is not fixed, it also has a great facility to melt very quickly, and it is difficult to remove it. And because the combustible sulfur is removed more easily from Jupiter than from Saturn, one of the causes which render it soft being removed by calcination, it must necessarily harden, whereas the two things that make Saturn soft, being strongly united in the composition of Saturn, and therefore neither can be taken from him except with difficulty, it is the cause that he cannot so easily harden himself. There is, however, this difference between the softness which comes from quicksilver, and that produced by combustible sulfur, that it is brittle and bendable, whereas that of quicksilver extends and lengthens greatly. And this is clearly seen by experience. For it is certain that the bodies or metals, which have a quantity of quicksilver, have a great extension, and that, on the contrary, those who have little quicksilver can hardly be extended. This is what makes Jupiter expand more easily and delicately than Saturn, Saturn more than Venus, this more than Mars, the Moon more than Jupiter, and the Sun much more than the Moon. It is therefore the fixed quicksilver and sulfur which give hardness to metals, and what makes them soft. These are the two causes opposed to that one, that is to say, the volatile quicksilver, and the combustible sulfur. And it is the sulfur which is not fixed, and the argent quick, whatever it is, fixed or volatile, which gives them fusion. But the sulfur which is not fixed necessarily gives the fusion to the metal without it reddening, as one sees it by arsenic, which is a combustible sulfur, and which being projected on the metals difficult to melt, gives them the fusion without it being necessary that they redden before. The argent quick, which is not fixed, makes all the same the metals easy to melt. But the fixed quicksilver gives fusion to the metal only after this metal has ignited and has reddened. And hence, it is the fixed sulfur which delays and which prevents the fusion of any metal whatsoever. This reveals a great secret to us. For since it is found by experience that the metals which have the most argent quick are the most perfect, it necessarily follows that the imperfect metals which have the most argent quick also approach nearest to perfection, and to the nature of the perfect. And therefore, the more sulfur the metals have, the more impure and imperfect they will be. From which we must infer that among the imperfect, Jupiter is the one that comes closest to the perfect bodies, since it has the most argent vive, which is what makes perfection, and that for this same reason Saturn is less close to it, Venus less than Saturn, and Mars less than none. This is understood if we consider these metals with regard to what makes perfection. For it would be quite another thing if they were considered in relation to the medicine which perfects them, which makes up for what they lack, which penetrating them to the interior, thins out their thickness, and which palliates and covers their darkness and their impurity by a radiance and a brilliance which it communicates to them. Because in this respect Venus is more capable of receiving perfection by means of this medicine. Mars can receive her less than she, Jupiter less than Mars, and Saturn has the least disposition of all to receive it. And that they needed different medicines for that. For we have seen that the hard metals, and which redden in the fire, needed a medicine which could soften them and rarefy their internal substance too tight, and make it uniform and all equal everywhere, and that on the contrary to the soft metals, which do not redden in the fire, a medicine was needed which hardened them, tightened them and which thickened their internal and hidden substance. We are going to see what these medicines are, we will say what their effects are, and what caused them to be invented, what they leave imperfect in the metals, and what they can give perfection to. Needed a medicine which could soften them and rarefy their internal substance too tight, and make it uniform and all equal everywhere, and that on the contrary to soft metals, and which do not redden in the fire, it was necessary a medicine which hardens them, tightens them and which thickens their internal and hidden substance. We are going to see what these medicines are, we will say what their effects are, and what caused them to be invented, what they leave imperfect in the metals, and what they can give perfection to. Needed a medicine which could soften them and rarefy their internal substance too tight, and make it uniform and all equal everywhere, and that on the contrary to soft metals, and which do not redden in the fire, it was necessary a medicine which hardens them, tightens them and which thickens their internal and hidden substance. We are going to see what these medicines are, we will say what their effects are, and what caused them to be invented, what they leave imperfect in the metals, and what they can give perfection to. Second part of the second book. Medicines in general, and the necessity of a universal medicine which gives perfection to all the imperfect metals, and whence it can be taken better and sooner. Chapter 11. That there must necessarily be two kinds of medicines, as much for each imperfect body as for quicksilver, one for white, the other for red, but that there is only one very perfect, which makes all the others useless. We have said before that spirits have more conformity with bodies than anything. And the reason we have given is that they unite better and more amicably with them than anything else in nature. Which gave me the first notion that spirits must be the true medicine to alter and change bodies. And it was precisely this that caused me to employ all my industry to find the artifice of truly transmuting, by means of the spirits, each imperfect body into a true and perfect moon and Sunday. I therefore believed that it was necessary to make different medicines of these spirits, according to the diversity of the things which were to be transmuted. For there being two kinds of these things, the quicksilver, which is a spirit, and which must be coagulated and fixed perfectly, and the bodies which do not have perfection, that is to say the imperfect metals, and these metals not being besides all similar, since some are hard and redden in the fire, such as Mars and Venus, and the others are soft, which do not redden, like Jupiter and Saturn, it is necessary that medicine, which must give perfection to so many different things, is also different itself. Thus a particular medicine is needed to fix and perfect quicksilver, which is different from that which must give perfection to imperfect metals. And with regard to Venus and Mars, which redden with fire, another special medicine is necessary for them, and which is different from that of Jupiter and Saturn, which are soft, and who do not blush, because the nature of these metals being visibly different, it is certain that to make them perfect, they need medicines of different kinds. Besides, although Mars and Venus have this in common between them, that both are hard, they nevertheless each have particular properties from which they differ. Because Mars is not fusible, and Venus is. Mars is entirely livid, full of dirt and impurities, and Venus, no. Mars has a dark whiteness, and Venus an impure redness and greenness. In what we see a big difference. So that these two metals being different in so many things, it is necessary that the medicine which must give them the perfection is similarly different. It is the same with Jupiter and Saturn. For though both agree in being soft, they are not necessarily soft in the same way, and they still differ in several other things. For example, Jupiter is clear, and Saturn is not, thus the medicine which must perfect them must not be the same. Moreover, the quicksilver and the imperfect metals which can be changed are transmuted into moon or sun, thus there must necessarily be a red medicine which transmutes them into sun, and a white one which changes them into moon. So that having two medicines, one solar and the other lunar, for each of the four imperfect metals, there will consequently be 8 kinds of medicines for the transmutation of these metals. And because quicksilver can still be changed into sun and moon, there will therefore still be 2 particular medicines for him. And thus there will be in all 10 medicines necessary to give perfection, both to quicksilver and to imperfect metals, which I have found with great difficulty and labor. But after long labor, and after stubborn study and long and deep meditation, and great expense, I have finally found a single medicine which exempts us from working at all those of which we have just spoken. For it softens the metal which is hard, and hardens that which is soft, it fixes what is volatile in them, it purifies what is impure in them, and finally gives them a tincture and a radiance that cannot be expressed, this tincture being more beautiful, and that luster more brilliant than the tincture and the luster which nature gives to the two perfect metals. We shall treat in order and in particular of these medicines, we will tell the composition and the causes, and we will not advance anything that we do not prove by experiment. For this purpose, we will speak first of the 10 particular medicines, and we will say in the first place that they are those of the imperfect metals, then that of quicksilver, and we will end with the universal medicine of the Magisterium, which generally gives perfection to all. But because the imperfect metals need to be prepared before receiving perfection, so as not to give cause to anyone to complain, that out of envy we have concealed or cut off something from our science. Chapter 12. That it is necessary to give a particular preparation to each imperfect metal. It is easy to know, by the things we have said above, what it is that nature, working for the production of metals, leaves superfluous or defective in each of those who are imperfect. For we have discovered the greater part of their nature, and what we have said of them would suffice to make them sufficiently well known. But because we have not given a full and complete idea of these metals, we will finish putting here what we omitted when we dealt with them in the preceding book. As there are therefore 2 kinds of imperfect bodies which can be changed, 2 soft, Jupiter and Saturn, which do not redden in the fire, 2 others hard. Mars and Venus, which do not melt, or at least only after turning red, it is certain that nature teaches us by the difference that she has put between them, that we must also prepare them differently. Now the first 2 imperfect bodies, which we have said are of the same nature, I mean the black lead, which in our art is called Saturn, and the white lead which has the jack, and which we ordinarily name Jupiter, are nevertheless very different, as much in their deep and hidden essence, as in their appearance and their exterior. For Saturn is manifestly livid, heavy, black, without a crack, and without any sound, whereas Jupiter is white, though a little blackish, has a crack, and has a little clear sound, as we have shown before, by the experiments which we have related of them, and by the declaration of their own causes. And these are so many differences by which a judicious artist can consider the preparations that should be given to them, and in the order that they should be given them, according as these differences are either lesser or greater. We will deal with all these preparations in succession. We will begin with that of the soft metals, and we will first say those of Saturn, then we will come to Jupiter, which has a different kind of softness than Saturn, we will continue with the other metals, and we will end with the preparations that must be given to quicksilver to coagulate it. But it should be noted beforehand that in the preparation of imperfect bodies or metals, there is nothing superfluous to remove from their interior, but from their exterior only. Chapter 13. That medicine must add what is defective in the imperfect metals, and that the preparation given to them to receive this medicine must take away what is superfluous. Various preparations are given to Saturn, and also to Jupiter, according as they are in a degree or nearer or more distant from perfection. Now there are 2 things which cause their imperfection, one which is natural to them, being deeply rooted in them, and united essentially to the principles of their composition, and it is the earthiness of their sulfur, and the impurity of their quicksilver. The other occurs at this first mixture, or at this first mixture of their principles, and it is nothing but a combustible and impure sulfur, and a filthy and filthy quicksilver, which are things of the first kind, i.e. of the nature of the spirits, which corrupt the substance of Saturn and Jupiter. For the first, it is impossible to be able to remove it from them, by any medicine whatsoever of the first order, that is to say by none of the 8 particular medicines, whatever industry one brings to it, but one can with little artifice separate the last from it. And as it is not possible to destroy the essence of a thing, and that it always remains the same, also it is impossible to remove from these metals these essential impurities which corrupt them. This is why some philosophers believed that in this way one could not perfect these metals by art. For me, when I was looking for science, I confess that I fell short in this place, as well as they, and that by no means or preparation that I could have imagined, I could never give the imperfect metals a true and perfect brilliance. On the contrary, all that I did only served to spoil and blacken them entirely. Which surprised me greatly, and I despaired for a long time of being able to succeed, but finally having returned to myself, after having racked my brains dreaming about it, I came to consider that the imperfect metals were dirty and impure in the depths of their nature, and that nothing brilliant or resplendent could be found in them, since there was nothing similar in their natural composition, being impossible to find in a thing what is not there. And from this I drew this conclusion: since, I say, there is nothing perfect about these metals, it is necessary that neither in the separation that one would make of them into various substances, nor in the depths of their nature, one can find nothing superfluous. And by this means I judged that there must be something lacking in them, which had to be supplemented and replaced by a matter or medicine which was proper and suitable to it, and which could add what was defective. Now the defect of these metals is to have too little quicksilver, and what little they have of it is not so condensed nor so compressed as it should be. And thus, to perfect and complete them, it is necessary to increase their argent viva, to tighten it, and give it a stable fixation that remains foolproof. Which is done by a medicine made of quicksilver itself. For when it is perfected with only quicksilver, then by its splendor and brilliance it palliates and covers their darkness, and changes it into a brilliant splendor, because the quicksilver, which is changed into medicine, being purified by our art, and reduced to a very pure and very brilliant substance, if one makes the projection of it on the imperfect bodies, it will make them brilliant and will give them the perfection which they lack, by means of its fixation, and by his purity he will transmute and perfect them entirely. We will say later what this medicine is, in a chapter that we will do specifically for this. Thus, from what we have just established, we must infer that we must necessarily find two kinds of perfections: one, which is made by a matter, which separates from the compound the substance which is impure; the other, by a medicine which covers and palliates this impurity by the brilliance of its splendor, and which gives it perfection, by making it beautiful and dazzling. Moreover, as one cannot find anything superfluous, but only something lacking in the interior and the essence of imperfect bodies, if there is something to be removed from them, it is from the exterior and from the appearance of these bodies that one must remove what happens to them, after they are already made and composed. And this is done by various preparations which we are going to relate. We will start with those of Jupiter and Saturn, of which we will speak jointly in the same chapter. Then we will deal with those of the other imperfect bodies according to their rank. Chapter 14. Of the preparation of Saturn and Jupiter. Different preparations are given to Saturn and Jupiter, depending on whether they have more or less need to approach perfection. These preparations, however, are reduced to two, one which is general, and the other particular. The general can be made in different ways, by means of which, as by so many degrees, the imperfect metals approach perfection. The first of these degrees consists in giving them luster, and in purifying their substance well. The second, to harden them, so that they redden in the fire before melting. And the third to fix them, by removing their fugitive or volatile substance. Now we purify them and make them radiant by three means, either by things which have the virtue of purifying them, or by calcining them and making them regain body, or by dissolving them. The things that purify them do it, either when they are limed, or being in the body. Their lime is purified, either with salts, or with alums, or with glass. Which is done this way. One calcines the metal, after which one throws on its lime water of alum, or of salts all pure, or in which one will have put powdered glass, and then one makes take again body with this lime, and this operation is repeated until the metal appears to be perfectly purified. This is done because the salts, the alums, and the glass having a completely different fusion than the metals have, these things separate from them, and in separating, they carry with them their terrestrial substance, leaving in this way the bodies all pure. Saturn and Jupiter, remaining in body and without being calcined, are still purified of this same kind. For this purpose, we reduce them to very subtle filings, which we mix all the same with the waters of alums, or salts, and the powder of glass. Then we put this filings back into body, by fusion, and we repeat this operation until these two metals appear to be well purified. There is still another way of purifying them, by washing them with quicksilver, in the manner we have said before, in the 11th chapter. For by this means one removes from these two imperfect bodies two kinds of substances which corrupt and infect them, one that is flammable and volatile, and the other coarse and earthly, because fire elevates and consumes all that is volatile. And when these metals are put back into a body by fusion, the well-proportioned fire still separates their earthiness. The manner of giving this proportion to fire will be found in our book of the Search for Perfection, which is before this one. For in this book I have put all the researches that I have made by my reasonings, as I have written in this one the operations and the experiments that I have made, and that I have seen with my eyes, and touched with my hands, without having taken anything away, and I have put it in the order that science requires it. There is still another means of purifying Saturn and Jupiter, which is to dissolve them, as we have already said, and to bring back into body what has been dissolved from them. For in this way it purifies itself better than by any other means whatsoever, and thus it is better than none, except that which is done by sublimation, which is the best of all. We have said that one of the degrees which approached these two metals to perfection was the hardening of their soft substances, so much so that they become so hard by this preparation that they cannot melt until they have reddened in the fire. To make this hardening, it is necessary to find the means of uniting intimately with their substance of the argent quick, or sulfur, or arsenic which resembles him, and that they are fixed, or else to mix with them hard things which are not fusible, such as lime, marcasites and tooties. For all this unites so well with them that they embrace each other mutually, because they love each other, and by this means these metals harden themselves in such a way that they do not melt until they have reddened before. The medicine which gives perfection, and whose composition I will describe below, has the same effect. Another sort of preparation which one gives to these two metals, and which is the third degree, is, as we have said, to remove their volatile substance from them. Which is done by holding them in a fire well proportioned for this, after having given them the first degree by calcination. Must be given in order and immediately. Because first it is necessary to remove from these two metals all that they have of volatile and combustible, which corrupts them, after which it is necessary to strip them of their superfluous earthiness, and finally, it is necessary to dissolve them and put them back in body. Or else they must be washed perfectly, by mixing them with quicksilver. To properly purify these two metals, it is necessary to follow this order. Let us now come to the particular preparation of these two bodies. We prepare Jupiter differently. First, by calcination, which hardens it, which it does not do to Saturn. Jupiter also hardens by preparing it with the water of alum, as we have said above. Secondly, by holding it for a long time in its calcining fire. For by this means he loses the jack, and it no longer makes other metals with which it is mixed brittle, as it did before. Which is not done in the same way with Saturn, because it has no jack, and it does not make the other metals sour and brittle as Jupiter does. This one still loses its jack by calcining it, and by putting it back in body several times, as it also does if one pours water of salts and alums on its lime, because these things take the jack out of him by their acrimony. The particular preparation of Saturn is likewise done by the calcination which is done by the acrimony of the salts. Because it hardens it, as it whitens particularly with talc, tooty, and marcasite too. I spoke more fully of all these kinds of preparations in my book of the Search for Perfection, where they can be seen, for I have only abbreviated here what I have said more fully about it there. Chapter 15. Of the Preparation of Venus. By following the order that we propose to ourselves, we now have to bet on the preparation of Venus, and that of Mars, which are the two hard metals. Let's start with Venus. It is prepared in different ways, either by raising it by sublimation, or without sublimating it. It is brought up by adroitly uniting it with the tooty, with which it has more conformity, and then putting it to sublimate in a sublimatory vessel, and by a degree of fire suitable for raising its most subtle part, which happens to be of great brilliance and very brilliant. Or after having reduced this metal into very small parts, that is to say into filings, we mix it with sulfur, and we sublimate it as we have just said. We prepare Venus of another kind without sublimating it, whether it is in lime, or that it be in body, by the things mondificatives, that is to say which have the virtue of purifying, such as are the tutti, the salts, and the alums. Or by washing it with quicksilver, as we have said, or by calcining it, and making it regain body, as well as the preceding metals, or by dissolving it and putting back into body what will have been dissolved from it, or finally it is purified like the other imperfect metals by washing it with quicksilver. As well as the preceding metals, or by dissolving it and putting back into body what will have been dissolved from it, or finally it is purified like the other imperfect metals by washing it with quicksilver. As well as the preceding metals, or by dissolving it and putting back into body what will have been dissolved from it, or finally it is purified like the other imperfect metals by washing it with quicksilver. Chapter 16. From the preparation of Mars. We also prepare Mars in several ways, either by sublimating it, or without sublimating it. It is sublimated with arsenic, and this sublimation is done as follows: we must find the means to unite with it as deeply as possible, that is to say, even in its interior, arsenic, which is not fixed, and to unite it so well that it is founded jointly with this metal. After which it will have to be sublimated in a clean vessel for that. This way of preparing Mars is the best and most perfect of all. It is further prepared with arsenic, by sublimating them both together several times, until Mars retains a certain quantity of this arsenic with it. Because if after that we make this metal take shape again, it will come out white, fusible, clean and well prepared. There is still a third way to prepare it, by melting it with lead and tutti. For that makes it clean and white all the same. But because I have promised to teach how to soften the hard bodies, and to harden the soft ones, by means of a particular calcination, lest they should think that I mean to omit something, I will tell how this operation is to be done. Similarly open the body that one wishes to harden after having completely calcined it. One mixes these two solutions together, and with this mixture one sprinkles alternately the calcined metal, crushing it, and imbibing it, calcining it, and making it resume body, until it becomes so hard, that he cannot melt unless he blushes first. The same thing is done with the lime of the soft bodies and the tutti, and the marcasite which one calcines and which one dissolves, of which then one makes the same imbibitions. And the purer and clearer these things will be, the more perfect will be the change they will make, on the bodies they will harden. And after having sublimated them, they are burned by the degree of fire that I said, in my book of furnaces, that it was necessary to serve for that. Finally we put them back into a body with a violent, but proportionate fire, and we repeat these operations until the bodies soften in the fusion, as much as they can be in proportion to their hardness. All these alterations and changes are of the first order, and without this the transmutation of metals cannot be done. Chapter 17. On the manner of purifying quicksilver. To complete all the preparations, it remains for us to speak of the modification or purification of the quicksilver, which is all the preparation that can be given to it. It is done in two ways. The first by sublimation, which we taught in the previous book, and the last by lotion or ablution, that is, by washing it. What is done thus? One puts the argent vive in a basin of glass, sandstone or earthenware, and above one pours vinegar until it floats. This done, place the dish or basin on a gentle fire, and let it warm up, so long as it can be moved freely with the finger. It is therefore stirred incessantly, until it breaks into grains as fine as powder, and all the vinegar that has been put into it is consumed. After which one washes with new vinegar all the earthly filth, and the refuse which he will have left in the dish, and one rejects them. It is necessary to reiterate this lotion, until the argent quick is completely stripped and cleansed of its earthiness, and that it appears of color of a very beautiful celestial blue. Which will be a mark that it has been sufficiently washed, and that it is well purified. These are all kinds of preparation. Now let's move on to medicines. Which will be a mark that it has been sufficiently washed, and that it is well purified. These are all kinds of preparation. Now let's move on to medicines. Which will be a mark that it has been sufficiently washed, and that it is well purified. These are all kinds of preparation. Now let's move on to medicines. Chapter 18. That the very perfect medicine necessarily gives 5 different properties of perfection, which are sharpness, color or tincture, fusion, stability, and weight, and that by these effects one should judge of what one should take this medicine. We will first speak in general of the medicines, their causes, and their effects, in accordance with the experiences that one can make of them. But above all, here are the maxims that must be established, by means of which we will know if the medicine is true, and if the transmutation that it will have made is perfect. That is to say, their useless and combustible sulfur, and their impure earthiness, and if in the fusion these two things are not separated from the metal, in which they are mixed when one makes on them the projection of the medicine which must transmute it. When we find a way to make this separation, it is an infallible sign that medicine is not perfect, and most assuredly it will neither abide nor persevere in trials, but it will separate from the metal upon which it has been projected, and it will go up in smoke, as I will evidently show hereafter, when I speak of the cup. Imperfect, the true weight of perfect metals, the transmutation which it is claimed to do is neither perfect nor true, but sophistical, having only a deceptive appearance. Because weight, in the same volume, is one of the essential marks of perfection. These are the 5 differences of perfection. And because the medicine of our Magisterium must necessarily communicate all these properties to imperfect metal and quicksilver by transmuting them, it is easy to judge from this what thing it should be taken from. For it is certain that this medicine can only be taken from things which best unite with the metallic bodies which have more conformity with them, which penetrate them even in the interior, which attach themselves and unite with them, and which by this means can change them. Now, whatever research and whatever test I have seen done in all other things, I have never found anything which has so much connection with the other metallic bodies as quicksilver. Chapter 19. Preparations that must be given to medicine, so that it has all the properties that it must necessarily have. We therefore only have to determine what the substance of quicksilver must be, in order to be a true medicine, and what properties it must have for that. Now, as experience has shown us that quicksilver makes no change in the imperfect metals, if it itself is not previously changed in its nature, we have thereby recognized that it must necessarily be prepared to have this effect. For it does not mingle in the interior of the imperfect metals, if it has not had its particular preparation, which consists only in making it such that it can mingle even in the depths and in the interior of the metal, which must be transmuted without ever being able to be separated from it. Now the argent vive cannot interfere in this manner, if it is not made extremely subtle by the particular preparation which we declared in the chapter where we treated of its sublimation. But when it could meddle in this way, it would not remain with the metal, and the impression it would make on it would not subsist if it was not made fixed. It will also not give the brilliance to the metal which it must necessarily have, if it is truly transmuted, and if its substance is not made very brilliant by a particular artifice, and by an operation which is done by means of a proper and suitable degree of fire. It will not even communicate to the imperfect the fusion of perfect metals, if it is not fixed in such a way that in this state it can soften the hard bodies, and harden the soft ones. Because the fixing must be so well spared, let it not prevent it from having enough moisture left to be able to give the fusion which we require, and which is necessary. It is therefore necessary to prepare the argent vivin so well, that first a very brilliant and very pure substance is made of it. Then we must fix it with this precaution, that we know how to give it the fire so appropriate and so just, that this fire leaves it only enough humidity to make a perfect fusion, and that it consumes all the surplus. For this purpose, if one wants to make a medicine from it to soften metals which are hard and slow to melt, one must give it at the beginning a slow fire, because the slow fire preserves the humidity and gives a perfect fusion. That if on the contrary we want, by this medicine, to harden the soft metals, one must make a strong and violent fire, because such a fire consumes the humidity and delays the fusion. And these are rules and maxims to which every sensible artist must carefully take heed, and have them always present, in whatever medicine he wishes to work, as he must also make several other considerations on the change of weight, which is made in transmutation, and to seek the cause of it and to notice the order in which this change takes place. Now, as regards the great gravity of the perfect metals, it comes only from the fact that their substance is very subtle and uniform, that is to say all of the same nature. For by this means, there being nothing between the parts of these metals which separates and disunites them. Chapter 20. Of the difference between medicines, and that there are some of the first, of the second, and of the third order. It is therefore only to make the materials on which it is necessary to work more subtle that the artist must apply himself in all his operations, either that he wants to prepare imperfect bodies, or that he intends to make the medicine which must give them perfection. Because the more the bodies which will be transmuted will be heavy, and the more they will be found perfect, by the rules of the art and by the experiment which one will make of it. But because there are several kinds of medicines, to speak of them usefully, it is necessary to understand them all, and to report all the differences. So I say there are three kinds. One which is of the first order, another of the second order, and finally another of the third order. I call medicine of the first order, the preparation, whatever it may be given to the minerals, which, after they are thus prepared, being projected upon the imperfect bodies, imparts to them a change and an alteration, which nevertheless does not give them such a great nor so strong a perfection, that afterwards they cannot be corrupted and changed, that is to say, return to their first nature, and that the medicine and the impression which it has made on them, do not entirely dissipate and evaporate, without nothing remains. Such is the sublimation which, without having received any fixation, whitens Venus and Mars. Such is still the tincture, drawn from the sun and the moon or Venus, which one mixes together, and which one puts on a furnace of cement, like zinnier asterisk, and other similar things. Because it is a tincture, which tints to truth, but which does not remain, on the contrary, it is lost in trials, exhaling itself in smoke. But nevertheless leave them with many impurities, as is the calcination of imperfect bodies, which removes from them all that is volatile in them, and which leaves them with their earthiness. As is still the medicine which reddens the moon, or whitens Venus, without these two tinctures being able after that to be removed from these two metals, which remain nevertheless in their surplus in their same nature, and keep the other impurities which they had before. Finally, I call medicine of the third order the preparation, which occurring to imperfect bodies by the projection that one makes of them on them, strips them of all their impurities, and gives them an entire and accomplished perfection. And this medicine is one and only of its kind. And whoever has it, he has no need to go to the trouble of looking for the 10 different kinds of medicines of the second order. That of the second order, the middle work, and that of the third order, the great work. These are all kinds of medicines. He has no need to trouble himself to look for the 10 different kinds of medicines of the second order. That of the second order, the middle work, and that of the third order, the great work. These are all kinds of medicines. He has no need to trouble himself to look for the 10 different kinds of medicines of the second order. That of the second order, the middle work, and that of the third order, the great work. These are all kinds of medicines. Chapter 21. Medicines of the first order, which whiten Venus. Following the order we have established, we will talk about all these kinds of medicine one after the other. For this purpose, we will first say the medicines of the bodies or metals, then we will move on to those of quicksilver, which are different from those of the bodies. And we will bring back all these medicines immediately. So we will begin with those of the first order, we will continue with those of the second, and we will end with those of the third. Of those which are for hard bodies, one is for Venus, the others for Mars, and the others for the moon. With regard to Venus and Mars, their medicine is to give them a pure whiteness, and moon medicine to make it red with a beautiful glow. For neither Venus nor Mars is given a red color with an apparent luster by any medicine of the first order, because these two metals being completely impure, they are not in a condition to receive the brilliance of the tincture of the sun, if beforehand they are not given a preparation which imparts luster to them. Let us therefore first speak of all the medicines of the first order for Venus, after which we shall see those which are for Mars. There is a medicine which whitens Venus with quicksilver, and there is one which whitens her with arsenic. One dissolves first the quicksilver precipitated, then one dissolves all the same lime of Venus, one mixes these two dissolutions, then one coagulates them, and finally one makes projection of this medicine on Venus in body, that is to say such as Venus is naturally without being calcined, and without her having any other preparation, and it makes it white and clean. Or dissolve quicksilver and litharge, both separately. We mix these two dissolutions, after which we dissolve the lime of Venus, which we want to whiten, and having put this dissolution with the preceding ones, one coagulates them, then one makes projection of them on the body, and it whitens it. Otherwise, we sublimate with the body of Venus alternately a certain quantity of quicksilver until a part of it remains with her, without them separating from it, even though we make it redden in the fire. Then, having watered it very often with distilled vinegar, it is crushed, so that the argent vivin penetrates it better. Then we burn it, and we sublimate it a second time with quicksilver, we water it or soak it with vinegar, we burn it, as we did the first time, and we repeat these operations, until a good quantity of quicksilver remains without evaporating, although we make it redden strongly in the fire. This white dye, to be of the first order, is very good. Here is another way. Quicksilver, such as it comes from the mine, is sublimated with other precipitated quicksilver, until that one is fixed on this one, and it is fusible, after which it is projected on Venus in body, and it will become of a whiteness to bear profit. Otherwise still, the moon and the litharge are dissolved separately, and these two dissolutions, being mixed together, they whiten Venus. But they whiten better, if in all the medicines which one will use to whiten it, one adds to it quicksilver, and that one does so well, that it remains there always without being exhaled. One still whitens Venus with sublimated arsenic, and it is the other kind of medicine which whitens it. This is done by taking lime from Venus, and sublimating with it arsenic once or twice, until they are incorporated together, and by this means Venus becomes white. But I warn you that if you are not skillful in making sublimations, arsenic will not remain with Venus, and will not communicate to her any permanent whiteness. So after having sublimated it once, you must sublimate it a second more, as I said, when I spoke of the sublimation of marcasite. Venus is still whitened in another way. Sublimated arsenic is projected onto the moon, then the whole thing is projected onto Venus, and it usefully whitens. Or, one mixes first with moon, litharge, or burnt lead, which one will have dissolved beforehand, then one throws arsenic above, and finally we make a projection of the whole on Venus, and it appears of a very beautiful white. And that's a first-order white. Or, one only throws sublimated arsenic on litharge dissolved and put back in body, then one makes projection of it on Venus being in fusion, and this medicine gives it a pleasant whiteness. Or, we mix Venus and the moon together, and on this is projected any medicine whatsoever which has the virtue of whitening. Now the moon is better pleased with arsenic than with any of the metals, this is why it prevents it from being sour and brittle. After the moon, Saturn has more affinity with arsenic. And that is why we usually mix arsenic with the moon and Saturn. Otherwise, sublimated arsenic is melted until it breaks into pieces, then it is thrown piece by piece onto Venus. I say that it must be thrown in pieces, and not powdered to make a projection, because being in powder, it ignites much rather than in pieces. And thus it exhales more easily, and having caught fire, it is consumed before it has fallen on the body which is reddened, and that he has not touched it. The redness is again removed from Venus, and it is whitened with tutti. But because the tutti doesn't whiten it well enough, it only yellows it. Now any kind of yellow has a great affinity with white. Here's how the tutti is used for this. We take any kind of tutti, it is dissolved and calcined, then one dissolves Venus, one mixes these dissolutions, and one yellows the substance of Venus, and whoever will work on Venus with the tutti, he will find profit there. Finally, Venus is whitened with sublimated marcasite, as well as with sublimated quicksilver, and one is made like the other. It only makes it yellow. Now any kind of yellow has a great affinity with white. Here's how the tutti is used for this. We take any kind of tutti, it is dissolved and calcined, then one dissolves Venus, one mixes these dissolutions, and one yellows the substance of Venus, and whoever will work on Venus with the tutti, he will find profit there. Finally, Venus is whitened with sublimated marcasite, as well as with sublimated quicksilver, and one is made like the other. It only makes it yellow. Now any kind of yellow has a great affinity with white. Here's how the tutti is used for this. We take any kind of tutti, it is dissolved and calcined, then one dissolves Venus, one mixes these dissolutions, and one yellows the substance of Venus, and whoever will work on Venus with the tutti, he will find profit there. Finally, Venus is whitened with sublimated marcasite, as well as with sublimated quicksilver, and one is made like the other. And the substance of Venus is yellowed with it, and whoever will work on Venus with the tutti, he will find profit there. Finally, Venus is whitened with sublimated marcasite, as well as with sublimated quicksilver, and one is made like the other. And the substance of Venus is yellowed with it, and whoever will work on Venus with the tutti, he will find profit there. Finally, Venus is whitened with sublimated marcasite, as well as with sublimated quicksilver, and one is made like the other. Chapter 22. From the bleaching of Mars. We must now speak of the various bleachings of Mars, which are done by means of these particular medicines of the first order, according to which it does not have a real fusion, that is to say, it cannot melt of itself, if one does not add a melter to it. So it must be whitened with a melting medicine. Any medicine that whitens Venus has the same effect on Mars, preparing it in the same way. Nevertheless, arsenic, of whatever kind, is the medicine which makes it particularly fusible. But whatever it is bleached and melted with, it must necessarily be mixed and washed with quicksilver, until it has no more impurity, and has become white and well fusible. Or, he must blush fiercely, and throw arsenic over it, and when it is melted, to project it on a quantity of moon. Because being once mixed with silver, it can only be separated with great difficulty. Or even, we calcine the Mars, we take away from it all its luminosity which can be dissolved, and which is what makes it impure. Which is done by dissolving it in the way I have just said. Then we sublimate with it the arsenic, which we will have purified before, by some sublimation that we will have made of it. And it is resublimated several times in this way, until some part of the arsenic becomes fixed with it. After that we soak it, or water it, with the dissolution of the litharge, mixing them, stirring them, and burning them alternately, and finally one makes it take again body by the same degree of fire with which I said that one puts back Jupiter in body, after it was calcined. This done, Mars will be white, clean and fused. Or, one will put it back in body, after having mixed its lime only with sublimated arsenic, and it will appear white, clean and fusible. Same manner and by the same artifice as we have said above that Venus was bleached. Chapter 23. Medicines that turn the moon yellow. To speak now with sincerity of the medicine of the first order, which gives to the moon the tincture of the sun, we will say that it is a medicine which attaches itself intimately to the moon, and penetrates it to its interior, and which by this means communicates this tincture to it, either that this medicine thus unites itself with the moon, and that it colors it of itself and by its own virtue, or that it comes from the artifice of our Magisterium. So that there are two kinds of medicines to dye the moon. We will speak first of the one which naturally attaches itself and unites itself to it. Then we will say by what artifice we make the other medicines, of whatever species, fit to unite, both with the moon and with the other metals, to penetrate them and to attach oneself to them strongly, without being able to be separated from them. One draws the first medicine, either from sulfur, or from quicksilver, or from the composition and the mixture of these two spirits. But the medicine which is taken from sulfur is much less effective, whereas that which is made from quicksilver is much more perfect. This medicine is also made from certain minerals which are not of the nature of these spirits, such as vitriol, and rosacea, which is called copper gum, or its sueur. We will speak first of the medicines of quicksilver, then of those which are made of sulfur or of the mixture of these two spirits. Then we will see what are those that are made with copper gum, and other similar things. Medicine is made with quicksilver in this way. One takes quicksilver which has been precipitated, and which precipitation has mortified and fixed. We put this precipitate in a furnace, which makes a strong fire, like the one where we put the limes of the metals to maintain them and keep them always in the same state. And we leave this precipitate in this furnace until it becomes red, like cinnabar, which is made from the mixture of quicksilver and sulfur. That if it does not blush in this fire, it will be necessary to take a part of argent vive, without being mortified, and having mixed it with sulfur, thus resublime this precipitate. But it is necessary that the sulfur and the quicksilver, which one will use to make this operation, are well purified of all their impurities, and after this sulfur has been sublimated 20 times with the precipitate, one will dissolve it in acrid and dissolving waters, then one will calcine it and one will dissolve it several times, until it is enough. That done, dissolve a part of moon, mix the dissolution with the previous ones, coagulate the whole, and project it onto the molten moon, and you will see that it will usefully tint it. But if the quicksilver blushes when it is precipitated, so that one makes the projection, and that this precipitate gives the tincture to the moon, it will suffice to put it and to hold it in the furnace, as I have just said, without it being necessary to mix it with anything tingent. But it is a difficult and painful work, more than one would think. It is still dyed with the dissolution of Mars. But the Mars must necessarily be calcined and fixed beforehand, which is no small matter. After that we prepare it as we said it should be done for the medicine of sulfur and quicksilver, by dissolving it and coagulating it, and we project it in the same way on the molten moon. And with all this the tincture that this medicine gives to the moon is not brilliant, but it is dark and dull, and of a pale and disagreeable color. We take a certain amount of each of these minerals. We sublimate what can be sublimated, and we sublimate the rest at high heat. It is necessary to sublimate a second time what will have been sublimated, and it will be done by a degree of fire which is proper to this operation, so that by this means one part is fixed after another, until the greater part is fixed. Then we will calcine this part with a fire that we will make in such a way that we can increase it, in order to complete and perfect this medicine. Then we will dissolve this matter, and there will be made of it a perfectly red water, which has no equal. After which, it will be necessary to find a way to give it ingredient, that is to say to make it so subtle that it can enter and penetrate into the body of the moon. I have sufficiently taught you the artifice of it by the things which I have said in this book, if you are a true inquisitor of the perfect work. And because we have seen that these things attach themselves and unite lovingly and intimately with all the substance of the moon, we have inferred from this that they were made and composed of the same principles as her. Which is certainly very true. For it is for this very reason that they have the virtue of altering and changing it. That is all the medicines of the first order. It is not that one cannot increase their number by mixing them variously, without the different ways in which their mixtures can be made, the tingent things losing none of their essence or their virtue. But to tell the truth, the medicine for the moon which is obtained from the argent vive is not a medicine of the first order, because it not only communicates one of the 5 kinds of perfection that we have noted above, but it gives the whole perfection. There are those who have imagined several other medicines, but one of 2 things necessarily happens, either that they make their medicine from the same things, or which are at least of the same nature as that of which we have spoken, or else that they make it of a thing, which by the alteration and the change that one gives to it, has the same virtue as what it is not in effect, that is to say, which has the same effect as the medicines of which we have just spoken, although it is not of the same nature as them. But this medicine can avail nothing of that which is clean and pure, nor of its parts, until the motor has rested in the highest motive of nature, without being in any way corrupted. Or which are at least of the same nature as that of which we have spoken, or else that they make it of a thing, which by the alteration and the change that one gives to it, has the same virtue as what it is not in effect, that is to say, which has the same effect as the medicines of which we have just spoken, although it is not of the same nature as them. But this medicine can avail nothing of that which is clean and pure, nor of its parts, until the motor has rested in the highest motive of nature, without being in any way corrupted. Or which are at least of the same nature as that of which we have spoken, or else that they make it of a thing, which by the alteration and the change that one gives to it, has the same virtue as what it is not in effect, that is to say, which has the same effect as the medicines of which we have just spoken, although it is not of the same nature as them. But this medicine can avail nothing of that which is clean and pure, nor of its parts, until the motor has rested in the highest motive of nature, without being in any way corrupted. Which has the same effect as the medicines of which we have just spoken, although it is not of the same nature as them. But this medicine can avail nothing of that which is clean and pure, nor of its parts, until the motor has rested in the highest motive of nature, without being in any way corrupted. Which has the same effect as the medicines of which we have just spoken, although it is not of the same nature as them. But this medicine can avail nothing of that which is clean and pure, nor of its parts, until the motor has rested in the highest motive of nature, without being in any way corrupted. Chapter 24. Medicines of the Second Order, and their Properties. Let us now come to medicines of the second order, and say all that it will be necessary to know of them, with the proofs and experiments which we have found to be true. Now, as there are medicines for transmuting the bodies, and there are also medicines for coagulating perfectly, that is to say, for fixing the quicksilver into a true sun and moon, we will begin with the first. Medicine of the second order is a medicine which, as I have already said, gives only one kind of perfection to imperfect bodies. But because in the imperfect bodies there are several impurities which corrupt them, and which are the cause of their imperfection, as for example in Saturn there is a volatile sulfur and an equally volatile argent quick, and besides that an earthiness which necessarily makes imperfect, a medicine is made, which removes either of these imperfections entirely, or which palliates and hides them, by embellishing it without touching the other imperfections, which remain there entirely. Moreover, as in the bodies, there is something which cannot be changed, because it is something which is essential to them, being born with their principles, it cannot also be taken away from them by any medicine of the second order, and there is only medicine of the third and great order which can cause it to be lost to the mixed bodies in which it is found. But because experience has shown that by calcination one could remove the superfluities of the volatiles, and that the earthiness which was not essential to the bodies, nor united to their principles, was lost by calcining them and putting them back several times in body, this knowledge has led to the invention of medicine of the second order, which can palliate and cover the essential imperfections of bodies, soften what is hard in them, and harden what is soft in them, and communicate to imperfects, both hard and soft, a perfection of the second order which is not sophistic, but a true perfection of sun and moon. Soft are not based very quickly, nor remove the impurity which is rooted in their principles. One was obliged to seek another medicine, which in the projection which one will make of it on them, may thicken and contract their parts which are too few and too far apart, and by this means harden them enough not to melt together before they have reddened in the fire. This medicine was also necessary to have an effect quite opposite on the imperfect hard bodies, by rarefying and attenuating their thickness, as much as is necessary to melt more quickly than they did without however depriving them of the property which they have of reddening before melting. And again so that by palliating the darkness which is found in each of these imperfect bodies, they embellish them, and that finally, as this medicine is either white or red, the white transmutes them into moon white, and the red into perfect red. Now these two medicines, the white and the red, differ only in that one is not so well prepared nor digested, and therefore so perfect as the other, the different effect they have of changing into white and into red, not coming from the difference of the bodies, on which one projects, nor from their being composed of different things in tincture, but of the only preparation or cooking. For the rest, the medicine of the second order, which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick thickness of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. And therefore so perfect as the other, the different effect they have of changing into white and into red, not coming from the difference of the bodies, on which one projects, nor from their being composed of different things in tincture, but of the only preparation or cooking. For the rest, the medicine of the second order, which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick thickness of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. Coming in no way from the difference of the bodies, onto which one makes a projection, nor from their being composed of things different in tincture, but of the only preparation or cooking. For the rest, the medicine of the second order, which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick thickness of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. Coming in no way from the difference of the bodies, onto which one makes a projection, nor from their being composed of things different in tincture, but of the only preparation or cooking. For the rest, the medicine of the second order, which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick thickness of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. Which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. Which must thicken and tighten the two rare parts of the soft bodies, must be quite differently prepared than that which must attenuate and rarefy the too thick of the hard bodies. Because one must give to the creamer a fire suitable to consume the too much moisture of the soft bodies, whereas the latter needs a gentle fire, and which retains the humidity which makes the fusion. Chapter 25. Lunar and Solar Medicine for Imperfect Bodies. Let us now speak of all the lunar and school medicines of the second order, and teach the manner of making them, beginning with the lunar medicines. It must nevertheless be remarked beforehand that sulfur, whatever it may be, is what prevents perfection, as we have shown above, and that quicksilver is what makes perfection in the works of nature, by diet or perfect digestion. Our intention being, therefore, not to alter the orders of nature, but to imitate her operations, as far as we can, we still make use of the argent vivin in the magisterium of this work, to make all the lunar and solar medicines, either to perfect the imperfect bodies, or to coagulate and fix the argent vivin. Because, as we have already shown, different medicines are needed to do these two things, we are now going to deal with one and the other in order and in succession. The matter nevertheless of these two medicines is the same, and there is only one, and we have made it sufficiently known in all that we have just said. Take it then and use it to do the lunar medicine of the second order, which I have promised to teach you, and for this purpose practice and learn to prepare it by the operations which are necessary to do this magisterium, which you cannot ignore, and which all end only in separating the pure substance from this matter, in fixing a part of this substance, and leaving the other to make the insuration. Continuing thus to do the magisterium, until you have rendered the medicine melting, which is what you must seek, and which you will recognize by experience. Because if by projecting your medicine on the hard bodies, it gives them a prompt fusion, and if it has quite the contrary effect on the soft bodies, it will be a certain mark that it is perfect. So that being projected on whatever imperfect metal it may be, it will change it perfectly into moon substance, provided it has been given the necessary preparations, otherwise it leaves some imperfection in the body which it changes, and it only communicates to it at most one of the sorts of perfections of which we have spoken above. Because it can do nothing more, having had the preparations only to be medicine of the second order, whereas medicine of the third order gives perfection to the imperfect, by the only projection that one makes of it on them, without it being necessary to prepare them beforehand. The solar medicine of the second order, for each of the imperfect bodies, is made of the same material and by the same diet. It differs, however, from the lunar, in that its parts are rendered more subtle by a quite particular manner of digestion, and by the mixture that one makes of a sulfur prepared by a subtle diet, with this matter that we have declared enough to make it known. And this diet tends only to fix this same very pure sulfur, and to dissolve it or to make it weak in moderation. For it is this sulfur which tints the medicine, and it is by means of it that, being projected on someone from the imperfect bodies, it gives him the perfection of gold, as much as the preparation it had before, as medicine of the second order, renders it effective, and as much as that given to the imperfect body, makes it capable of receiving it. And if this same medicine is projected on the moon, it will give it the perfection of the sun with great profit. Chapter 26. Of the medicine which coagulates and fixes the quicksilver. To complete the medicines of the second order, it remains for us to speak of those which coagulate or fix the quicksilver. I therefore say that the matter of this medicine must be taken from the same things from which those of the other medicines are taken, namely from what we have sufficiently made known, by all that we have said in the preceding chapters. And the reason is that quicksilver, which is volatile, flees easily, without even being much heated, needs a medicine which, before it is exhaled, first attaches itself intimately and deeply to it, which unites itself to it in its least parts, which thickens it, and which by its fixation retains it, and preserves it in the fire until it can suffer a more violent, which consumes its superfluous humidity, and which by this means converts it in a moment into a real sun or moon, depending on whether the medicine has been prepared for red or white. Now, as nothing could be found that suits quicksilver better than what is of the same nature as it, we judged from there that it was necessary to make this medicine from quicksilver itself, and we imagined the means of changing it into medicine by our artifice. And this means consists only in preparing the argent vivre in the manner that we have already said, by a long and assiduous work, by which its subtle and purer substance is changed, that which is white into moon, and that which is orange into sun. Now, it cannot become orange if one does not mix with it something which gives it this tincture, and which is of its same nature, and only afterwards, from this very pure substance of quicksilver, by means of the operations used to make the Magisterium, a medicine is made which attaches itself very strongly to quicksilver, which makes it very easily fusible, and which coagulates and fixes it. Because if it is prepared beforehand, as it should be, this medicine will convert it into a real sun or moon. We ask where this quicksilver substance should mainly be drawn from. I answer that one must take it from the things where it is, and draw it from these same things. Now it is certain that naturally it is in the bodies and in the argent viv itself, since both the quicksilver and the bodies are constantly all of the same nature, as experience shows. Nevertheless it is more difficult to find this substance in the bodies, whereas it is easier to find, and nearer in quicksilver, though not more perfect there. But in whatever place one finds, and from where one takes this medicine, either in the bodies or in the substance of the quicksilver, one can say that it is the medicine of the precious stone. Chapter 27. How by art one can make incoming medicines, or give them ingredients. It sometimes happens that the medicines of which we have just spoken mix, and sometimes also they do not mix with the bodies. Thus it is necessary to teach by what means one can make them capable of mingling, that is to say of entering deeply into bodies, into which they could not otherwise enter. This means is to dissolve what is incoming, and also to dissolve what is not, and then to mix these two dissolutions. Because everything that can mingle in the smallest parts with these dissolutions, of whatever nature, will immediately become entering. Now it is certain that it is through dissolution that this ingredient is acquired, because it is through dissolution that fusion is communicated to what is not fusible. And therefore, it is by this means that they become fit to enter into bodies, and to alter or change them. And that is also why we calcine certain things that are not of the nature of those we are talking about, so that they can dissolve better. And they are only dissolved so that the bodies better receive their impression, and that by this means they are better prepared and better purified. There is still another way of making what is not entering, because of its thickness, which is done by sublimating it several times with spirits, which are not inflammable like arsenic and quicksilver, without making it fixed. Or else by dissolving several times what of itself is not entering. Here is yet another good way to give ingredients to things that cannot be mixed with bodies or metals. You have to dissolve the body into which you want to introduce the medicine, in order to change it and alter it, and you have to dissolve the thing, or the medicine, that you want to enter the body, and change it. It must not, however, be dissolved all at once, but only a part, and from this dissolution we will repeatedly water what has not been dissolved. Because by this means, it is necessary that this medicine enters in this body, and that it penetrates it, although it does not follow for that it must enter so easily in the other bodies. These are the artifices by which things become incoming, by the conformity of their nature. Chapter 28. Third-order medicine in general. We have only to speak of third-order medicine. There are two kinds, one called lunar, and the other solar. It is however only one medicine, since both have only one same essence, and that they act in the same way. This is why the ancient philosophers, in the books that we have read from them, all assure that there is only one medicine. The only difference in it is that to make the solar medicine, the color red is added to it, which gives it the tincture. And this color comes from the very pure substance of the fixed sulfur, which is only in the solar medicine, and which is not found in the other. Now we call this medicine of the third order, the great work, because it requires greater application to discover it, longer labor to prepare it, and much more trouble to perfect it, than those of the first and second order. This medicine does not however differ essentially from that of the second order, except that it only requires a more subtle preparation, by a regime of fire which must be done by degrees, and a longer and more assiduous work. I will tell its diet and the manner of preparing it by its causes and its experiences, and I will teach what different degree of fire it is necessary to give it to be medicine of the third order. For in order for the solar medicine to have its perfect tincture, it needs a degree of fire different from that which is necessary to give perfection to the lunar medicine. Chapter 29. Third Order Lunar Medicine. The way to make this medicine is to take the stone, that is to say the matter, which must now be sufficiently known, separate its purest part and set it aside, then fix something of this very pure part, and also leave some unfixed. We take what is fixed, we dissolve everything that can be dissolved, and what is not dissolved, we calcine it. Then one dissolves all the same a second time everything that can be dissolved, thus continuing to calcine and dissolve, until one has dissolved a good part of it. After which one mixes all these dissolutions, one coagulates them and roasting them lightly, one holds them in a moderate fire until one can give to this matter a stronger fire, according to its need. Then start again, like the first time, to dissolve everything that can be dissolved, coagulate it, and put it back in a moderate fire, until it can suffer a greater one to give it its perfection. These preparations must be repeated 4 times, and at the end this matter will be calcined as it should be. This being done, the most precious land of stone will be well prepared. Then take this part of your matter, which you have kept without fixing it, and mix it suddenly and skillfully with this earth thus prepared, by their least parts, and try to sublimate them so well together, in the way that I have said, that what is fixed rises and sublimates entirely with what is not fixed, that is to say with what is volatile. And if after that what is fixed did not rise, it will still be necessary to add to it as much volatile matter or which is not fixed, as it will be necessary to make it sublimate. After which, they must be resublimated and continue to do so, until everything has become fixed. Then we will water it one part after another, with the same matter, which we have kept, and which has not been fixed, in the way that you must know, until everything rises and sublimates. Clamp again until it melts easily after blushing, and you will have a medicine which will transmute all imperfect bodies and any quicksilver into a very perfect moon. Then we will water it one part after another, with the same matter, which we have kept, and which has not been fixed, in the way that you must know, until everything rises and sublimates. Clamp again until it melts easily after blushing, and you will have a medicine which will transmute all imperfect bodies and any quicksilver into a most perfect moon. Then we will water it one part after another, with the same matter, which we have kept, and which has not been fixed, in the way that you must know, until everything rises and sublimates. Clamp again until it melts easily after blushing, and you will have a medicine which will transmute all imperfect bodies and any quicksilver into a most perfect moon. Chapter 30. Third Order Solar Medicine. To make this medicine it is necessary, while preparing it, to add to it with great artifice an incombustible sulfur by fixing, calcining and dissolving, and by reiterating these operations until this sulfur is pure and clean. But before all that, one must have perfectly sublimated the matter of this medicine. The manner of adding this sulfur is done by reiterating the sublimation of the part of the stone, that is to say of its matter which is not fixed, and by joining it industriously with the fixed part, so much so that the latter rises with the other, and communicates to it its fixity and stability. And the more one repeats these operations, which give an exuberant perfection to this medicine, the more it acquires perfection, the more it becomes effective, and the more finally its virtue increases and multiplies. But in order not to give anyone cause to complain of me, I am going to tell in what the whole accomplishment of the Magisterium consists, and that in a few very intelligible words, which will be understood by all, without omitting anything. And finally to do the volatile fix again. Do this, and you will possess a very precious secret, which is worth incomparably more than all the secrets of all the sciences of the world, and which is truly a treasure, which cannot be valued enough. Seek it out with hard work and very deep meditation. Because by this means you can acquire it, and not otherwise. Moreover, by redoing, as I have said, the operations of this medicine which is called its multiplication, one can raise to such perfection, that it will truly change an infinity of quicksilver into very perfect sun and moon. And that depends only on its multiplication. It only remains for us to praise and bless in this place the very high and very glorious God, Creator of all natures, for what He has condescended to reveal to us all the medicines that we have seen and known by experience. For it is by His fearful inspiration that we applied ourselves to seeking them with great difficulty, and that finally we made them, and that we saw with our eyes and touched with our hands the perfect magisterium that we have so long sought. That if we concealed the thing, he who will be a son of science should not be surprised. For it is not from him that we have hidden it, but from the wicked, having taught it in such a way that most assuredly a fool will understand nothing of it, whereas what we have said about it will encourage a wise man to attach himself even more strongly to seeking it. Courage then, son of science, seek and you will infallibly find this most excellent gift of God, which is reserved for you alone. And you, children of iniquity, who have bad intention, flee very far from this science, because it is your enemy, and it is made for your loss and your ruin, which it will most assuredly cause you. For divine providence will never allow you to enjoy this gift of God, which is hidden for you, and which is forbidden to you. Third and last part of the second book. Trials of Perfection. Chapter 31. Division of the things contained in this part. We do not stop to speak here of experiments, which everyone knows how to do, such as examining perfect metals by their weight, their color, and the extension they receive under the hammer, because you don't have to be very clever for that. Thus we will treat in this part only of the tests which the artists make to know if the medicine, of which one will have made projection on the imperfect bodies, and which will have them transmuted, will have given them a true perfection. Metal that has been reddened, calcination, reduction in body, and the ease or difficulty he will have in receiving the quicksilver. Following this order, we will start with the cup, then we will come to the other trials, and we will report the causes of each in their place. Chapter 32. From the cup. Let us see, then, what the cup is, let us say the causes of it, which will be very manifest, and the way to do it. But it must first be remarked that only the sun and the moon can undergo this examination. In investigating therefore what is the cause of the effect produced by the cup, and whence comes that of the imperfect metals, which are put to this examination, there are some who suffer it longer, and others less. We shall see by the same means, what makes the real difference of the two perfect bodies, from the imperfect. Principles, where we have expressly dealt with them above. For we said then that their substance was composed of a great quantity of quicksilver, and of its purest substance, very subtle at first, but which has since been thickened, and rendered in a state of not melting until it has become red in the fire. And from there we draw this consequence that the imperfect metals, which have the most earthiness, suffer the cupel the least, and that those which have the least, suffer it more. And the reason is, because the parts of the latter being more subtle, being not intermixed with any gross earthiness, they mingle better, and they unite more strongly together, and so they are much more clinging to each other. And from this it follows again that bodies, whose parts are thinner and more subtle, or on the contrary which are thicker and coarser than those of the perfect bodies, being mixed together, must necessarily be entirely separated from each other, when they are put to this test, because these bodies do not all melt in the same way, and at the same time, between those, and those which in their composition have the least quicksilver, separate soonest from the others. And why he separates the first of those who are put to this trial with him? Because it is composed of a lot of earthiness and very little argent vive, and that it melts easily and quickly, which are two things that are completely opposed to this examination. And because he goes and exhales himself rather than one of the other imperfect bodies, this is why he is more fit than any other to do this test, and to serve as examiner. For exhaling itself first, it removes and drags with it the other imperfect bodies that are placed there. And for this same reason, less of the perfect body is consumed in the fire that is made for the cup, although it is very violent, because Saturn, which is the examiner, does not stay there so long, whereas the perfect body remains there until the end, and long after Saturn is all consumed. And thus, he burns less of the perfect body in this examination, which is not done through the mediation of lead, and he even purifies himself more there. This is why Jupiter, having less earthiness, and more quicksilver than Saturn, and what it has of it being purer and more subtle, when it is mixed with the other metals, it suffers the cup longer than does Saturn or Venus, because it attaches itself more intimately to what there is of perfect metal mixed with it. And it is for this very reason that when there is Jupiter mixed with one of the perfect bodies, in the mass of which one makes the test, the perfect body decreases a lot, before Jupiter separates from it. As for Venus, although she only merges after having blushed, nevertheless, when she is mingled with a perfect body, as she does not merge so soon as him, this causes her to separate from it, but not yet so soon as Saturn, because she blushes before she merges. But as it has much less argent vive than Jupiter, as it has more earthiness than it, and as it is consequently of a thicker substance, it also separates rather than Jupiter from the mass where it will be mixed with an imperfect metal, because Jupiter clings to it much more intimately than does Venus, for the reason I have just said. With regard to Mars, having no fusion, because it has almost no humidity, it does not mingle with any of the metals, and if it happens that by the violence of the fire, it mixes with the sun or the moon, having no humidity, it will drink that of these two perfect metals, and will unite with them very exactly, and by its least parts. So that although it has much earthiness, and very little quicksilver, and that it is not even fusible, it is nevertheless very difficult to separate it from the perfect metals, and one must be a very expert to be able to do so. The artist, who will fully understand the reasons I have just said, why there are metals which suffer from the cup, and others which suffer from it more or less, will thereby know what must be done to perfect the imperfect metals, that is to say what must be added to them and taken away from them. But if he doesn't hear me or if he doesn't believe me, and if he only wants to follow his whim on this, it won't help him to discover the truth. I said at the beginning of this chapter that the two perfect bodies, that is to say the sun and the moon, undergo the examination of the cup. I said the reason, I explain it again and I add that it is because of their good and strong composition, which comes from their perfect mixture, and from their pure substance, whereas the imperfect metals cannot suffer it, because of the impurity and weak union of their principles. Chapter 33. How the cup metal examination is done. To make the cup, you must take sifted ashes, lime, or powder from the bones of beasts, which you will have burned. One mixes all this together, or a part only, we soak it with a little water, and we give it the shape by flattening it with the hand, so that it has a firm and solid base, and we push in the middle a little more than the ribs, and on this middle, which has the shape of a small cup, we throw a little powdered glass, and let it dry. We then use this cup, as I will say. We place the metal, or the mass of metal that we want to cup, in the middle of this cup, at the place where it is a little hollow, we put coals on top that we light, and we blow continuously with a bellows on the matter that we put there, until it is melted. This done, one throws lead piece by piece over it, and continues to blow strongly, in order to continually maintain a flaming fire. And when you see matter turning and moving strongly, be assured that it is not pure. You have to wait, however, until all the lead is exhaled. For if after that the agitation of matter still continues, it is a sign that it is not purified enough, so one must still throw another lead over it, and blow continuously until it goes away. That if after having thrown lead the second time, you see that matter does not yet remain at rest, you must blow over it, until this movement stops, and that the surface of the molten material appears sharp and clear to you. So remove the coals, defeat the fire, and throw water on your matter, because you must find it well cupelled. If while blowing you throw from time to time some powder of glass in your cupel, the metal which you examine will purify itself better, because the glass takes the garbage away by hanging it. Instead of glass, you can throw in salt, or borax, or alum of any kind. This test can be done in an earthen crucible as well as with a cup, by blowing all around over it, so that the metal that will be put inside to be tested, is rather melted and purified. And throw water on your matter, because you must find it well cupelled. That if while blowing you throw from time to time glass powder in your cupel, the metal which you examine will purify itself better, because the glass takes the garbage away by hanging it. Instead of glass, you can throw in salt, or borax, or alum of any kind. This test can be done in an earthen crucible as well as with a cup, by blowing all around over it, so that the metal that will be put inside to be tested, is rather melted and purified. And throw water on your matter, because you must find it well cupelled. That if while blowing you throw from time to time glass powder in your cupel, the metal which you examine will purify itself better, because the glass takes the garbage away by hanging it. Instead of glass, you can throw in salt, or borax, or alum of any kind. This test can be done in an earthen crucible as well as with a cup, by blowing all around over it, so that the metal that will be put inside to be tested, is rather melted and purified. The metal you examine will purify itself better, because the glass takes the garbage away by hanging it. Instead of glass, you can throw in salt, or borax, or alum of any kind. This test can be done in an earthen crucible as well as with a cup, by blowing all around over it, so that the metal that will be put inside to be tested, is rather melted and purified. The metal you examine will purify itself better, because the glass takes the garbage away by hanging it. Instead of glass, you can throw in salt, or borax, or alum of any kind. This test can be done in an earthen crucible as well as with a cup, by blowing all around over it, so that the metal that will be put inside to be tested, is rather melted and purified. Chapter 34. Of cement, and why there are bodies or metals which suffer it better, and others which suffer it less. We have said above that the bodies which have the most combustible sulfur are burned much more by calcination, and that those who have less, do not get burned so easily. The sun being therefore that of all the metals which has the least sulfur, and what it has of it being fixed, it follows from this that it is the least combustible of all, even by the fire of flame. The moon having likewise less sulfur than all the other metals, and yet having more than the sun, it is certain that she cannot endure the flaming fire so long as the sun, nor other things which burn in the same way. Venus will be able to suffer it even less, because besides she has more sulfur than these two perfect metals, she still has terrestrialities. Jupiter having less sulfur and earthiness than Venus, but yet more than the sun and the moon, he will consequently burn himself less in the flaming fire than will Venus, but more than the sun and the moon. For Saturn, it has more sulfur and earthiness in its composition than any of the bodies of which we have just spoken, also it ignites much sooner, and burns much more quickly in flame fire. Which comes mainly from the fact that its sulfur is strongly mixed in its substance, and that this sulfur is more fixed than that of Jupiter. With regard to Mars, if it does not burn itself, it is by accident that this is done, not that it comes from him. Because when we mix it with bodies that have a lot of humidity, he drinks it, because he has none, and because he is extremely dry, having very little mercury. And if it is mixed with some other body, it neither ignites nor burns, unless the bodies with which it will be mixed are of themselves inflammable and combustible. For in that case it necessarily burns and catches fire, depending on whether the bodies with which it is mixed are inflammable and combustible themselves. This presupposed, the cement being made of inflammable things, we see why it was invented, and what is its use, which is so that all that would be combustible in the metals should be burned and consumed. There being therefore only one body, which is the sun, which is incombustible, there is only it or what will come closest to its nature, which will not be consumed by the cement. There are, however, bodies which resist it more, and others who suffer it less. And it is easy, by the things we have just said, to discern it. For this reason the moon lasts there longer than the sun, Mars less than it, Jupiter less than Mars, Venus less than Jupiter, and Saturn the least of all. Chapter 35. What is cement made of, and how is proof made? Now let's see how cement is made. Because as it is of great use, to examine whether the metals are perfect or not, an artist must necessarily know how to do it. Cement is therefore made with mineral matters which ignite, as are all those which blacken, which flee from above the fire, which penetrate and which burn. For example, vitriol, ammoniac, verdite, to which a little old brick powder is added, and a little or not at all of sulfur, man's urine, with other similar sharp and penetrating things. From all this soaked with the urine, one composes a cement, of which one makes layers, on laminates of metal which one wants to pass through the cement. These laminae are then arranged in an earthen pot, where there will be iron grids, and these laminae are laid in such a way that they do not touch each other, and are not lying on top of each other, but that there is space between two, so that the ardor of fire can extend freely, and act equally on all. You must put this pot, thus accommodated, in a furnace, and hold it there for 3 days at strong fire, taking care nevertheless not to make the fire so violent that the laminae could melt, but let it be such that the laminae only keep always red. After that time, the laminae will be found clean and purified of all kinds of filth and impurities, provided that the metal, of which they are, is perfect. Because if it is not, they will be completely destroyed and burned by the calcination which will be made of them. There are some who, without cement, put sheets of metal in a flaming fire, and they are purified all the same, if they are of perfect metals, for otherwise they burn and turn to ashes. But in the examination which is carried out in this way, the laminae must be held much longer in the fire than when they are accommodated with cement. Moreover, as the moon is not very different from the nature of the sun, as long as one prepares it, it remains with it in the same examination, and it suffers it all the same, without separating from it. Also the metals only separate from each other, both in the cup and in the cement, because of the difference which is found in the composition of their substance, because this is what gives them a different fusion, and what causes them to have their parts more or less tight. And hence it comes that they separate from each other in these two examinations. Because the substances of metals, which are of a very strong composition, could not be corrupted by any foreign body, because these metals, and these foreign bodies, are two different substances which cannot mingle and unite together by their least parts. This is why, when the metals are mixed with each other, they separate by this artifice, without their essence being entirely corrupted or destroyed. This is why we know if, in the transmutation, the imperfect bodies have received a true perfection, if they melt properly, if they redden in the fire. Chapter 36. From the reddening of metals to fire. Perfect metals redden in the fire in a determined time before melting. In order for the imperfect to be truly transmuted, and to receive a true perfection, they must necessarily be fused in the same way, I mean that before melting, they must blush while inflaming, and they must appear of a beautiful celestial blue, as do the perfect bodies before coming to such a dazzling whiteness that the eye cannot bear. Because the perfect bodies blush perfectly with a very strong redness, before melting, and they only come to this great whiteness, which one cannot look at, when they are melted. Thus, if the imperfect bodies, on which one makes the projection, are based before blushing, it is a mark that they are not perfect, and if they blush only with difficulty, and by a very violent fire, their transmutation is not true. What should be heard of imperfect bodies, which are naturally soft, the same must be inferred from Mars alone. For the metals which do not naturally redden, do not easily acquire this property, by the preparation which one gives them, nor do those who are not fused by themselves receive thereby a fusion similar to that naturally possessed by perfect bodies. And if after having projected the medicine on these metals, they do not blush before their fusion, and if they do not cast a light of a beautiful, very pleasant celestial blue, one can truly say that their transmutation is not perfect. Moreover, if they do not have the same weight of perfect metals, in the same volume, if they do not have the same color, nor the same luster, if they do not blush in the same way, and finally if they lack some other property of perfect bodies, which one can recognize by the different tests that one has imagined for this, one can say that the artist has not succeeded well in his research, nor in his work. So he must begin to study and seek everything anew, until he acquires the true knowledge of the Magisterium, which he must however expect only from the goodness of God alone. And finally if they lack some other property of perfect bodies, which can be recognized by the different proofs that have been imagined for this, it can be said that the artist has not succeeded well in his research, nor in his work. So he must begin to study and seek everything anew, until he acquires the true knowledge of the Magisterium, which he must however expect only from the goodness of God alone. And finally if they lack some other property of perfect bodies, which can be recognized by the different proofs that have been imagined for this, it can be said that the artist has not succeeded well in his research, nor in his work. So he must begin to study and seek everything anew, until he acquires the true knowledge of the Magisterium, which he must however expect only from the goodness of God alone. Chapter 37. From Merger. We are now going to talk about fusion, and we will say all that will be necessary about it, because it is a test which obviously lets us know the metals which redden in the fire, and those which do not redden in it. I therefore say firstly that the fusion of the perfect bodies only takes place in one way, which is that they never merge until they have blushed before. But as there are other metals which redden all the same, before melting, it should be noted that the perfect ones redden in a particular way. For when they redden, they do not become completely white, there does not appear any darkness in the fire which issues from them, and they do not melt as soon as they have reddened, nor do they immediately become liquid and runny. When we see therefore that a metal will melt at a very low fire, or that it will melt without reddening, or that while melting it will appear blackish, it is an infallible mark that it is either an imperfect body, as it is naturally, or if some medicine has been sprayed on it, that this medicine is imperfect. That if even after a metal has reddened, it is not cooled by soaking it in water, and its redness suddenly changes into blackness, and so it loses its redness before hardening, it is certain that this metal, whatever it is not perfect, and it is assuredly one of the imperfect metals which are naturally soft. But if it is a metal which, before melting, only reddens with difficulty, and even only at high heat, and if being red it sheds a brilliance and a very resplendent and completely white light, it is a testimony that this body is not perfect, but it is one or the other of the two hard bodies, that is to say Venus or Mars. In the same way, if one removes from the fire a metal after being melted, and that it immediately hardens, so that it is no longer flowing or liquid, remaining always red and brilliant, whatever this body, and whatever medicine that one has projected on it, it does not have the true perfection of moon or sun, but it is either Mars, or something similar. For there are some who, being red, appear blackish, and this is the way to redden imperfect metals, which are soft. There are others whose redness is light red, and these are the perfect metals. And finally there are others, whose redness is very white, and which cast brilliant rays, and these are necessarily the imperfect bodies which are hard, as reason and experience show. But to be more certain of all the ways in which the metals redden in the fire, one has only to melt a little of each, and consider first in what degree of fire each of them melts, and then take heed to all the differences in their fusion. Because in this way we will be fully instructed in all things, and not otherwise. It only depends on practice and experience. And this is a general warning, which must serve for all manners of examinations, as much of those of which I have already spoken, as of those which we still have to say. So much for fusion. Chapter 38. Of the exposure of metals to the vapors of acidic objects. Our order wants us to speak now of the proof that is made to know if the bodies are perfect by putting them on the vapors of acrid and acid things. We have imagined this proof because we have seen by experience that the perfect bodies being put on the vapor of acute things, that is to say of those which have a sour, pontic and acid juice, if they are pure and without mixture, nothing is formed above, mainly on the sun. And if these perfect bodies have some alloy, there is on their surface a kind of small flour or down, of a very pleasant celestial blue color, and which works even better on gold, which is mixed with some other metal, than on silver. So, in imitation of nature, we put the bodies which have been prepared and altered by our medicines to the same test, to try if the same thing and the same color of a celestial blue will form on them. Which comes only from a clean and pure quicksilver, as we have sufficiently shown above. This is why when we put any body or metal whatsoever, which will have been altered by medicine, on the vapor of acid things, and we see that it will not produce this beautiful celestial color, we can say that this body is not entirely perfect. Now here is the difference that by this examination, we notice between imperfect bodies or metals. On Mars, a brownish redness is formed, or a yellowish brown intermixed with greenness. On Venus a brown-green mixed with a celestial blue, cloudy and obscure. On Saturn a brown-white and on Jupiter a clear white. And all the more so as gold, which is the most perfect body or metal, being put to this test, produces nothing similar, or that it produces very little, and that it is even very long in doing so, and that moreover Jupiter, by the vapor of the acids, casts this gummy flour, later than do the other imperfect metals. We infer from this that Jupiter is that of all the imperfect metals which has the greatest disposition to receive perfection, by the great work. It is thus that, by means of this examination, you will be able easily to know from which species of metal will be that which you will have wanted to change by medicine, if you consider well immediately what I have just said in this chapter. That if it can serve you nothing for this purpose. Chapter 39. On the extinction of metals reddened by fire. We do this test in various ways to know by it if the imperfect metal, on which we will have projected the magisterium, is perfect or not. For first, having extinguished in a liquor this metal, after having reddened it with fire, if one pretended to change it into moon, and that it does not become white being extinguished, or if having received the solar medicine, it does not become yellow, and that it takes some other color, it is an obvious mark that the medicine, by which one wanted to transmute this metal, is neither true, nor perfect. Secondly, if after having reddened and extinguished several times in water, where salts or alum have been dissolved, a metal on which some medicine has been sprayed, we see rising above a somewhat blackish scale, or if after having extinguished it in sulfur water, and having reddened it and then extinguished it several times in the same manner, a great deal of slag or flake separates from it, or if he becomes ugly black and disagreeable, or if it breaks under the hammer, it is certain that the medicine which will be used to transmute this metal, is deceptive and sophistical. Third, if after having passed a metal through a cement made with ammoniac salt, verdet and child's urine, which is that which has the most acrimony, or of some other similar thing, and after that, having made it red and quenched, that which appeared to have been changed into moon or sun, being forged, has by the color neither silver nor gold, or if it flakes under the hammer, it is certain that this metal has only been changed by sophistication. Finally, here is a constant and general maxim for all kinds of examinations and tests, that is, that if the metal which has been altered by any medicine whatsoever, of the first, second, or third order, is found not to have the true weight, in the same volume, nor the true color of the perfect metal, into which it has been claimed to be transmuted, the artist has certainly deceived himself in his work, and his medicine is only a cunning and a sophistication, which not only profit nothing, but which causes the ruin of the infamy of those who apply themselves to these sorts of works. Chapter 40. Mixture of combustible sulfur with metals. We know all the same, by the mixture that we make of the sulfur with the metals, if the medicine that we will have projected on it is true and perfect. Because we drown by experience that the sulfur being mixed with the bodies or metals, burns some more than the others, and that there are some which after that take again body, and others which do not take it again. And thus one can know by this the difference between the imperfect metals, which will have been changed by means of the sophistical medicines from those which will have been truly transmuted by the elixir. So that as of all bodies or metals, both perfect and imperfect, we see that the sun is the one that the sulfur burns the least, and after it Jupiter, then the moon, and finally Saturn, and that Venus burns more easily than any of them, and Mars still rather and more easily than her, and then all the others. We can judge from there which are the metals closest to perfection, and which are those which are the furthest from it. We judge similarly by the diversity of the colors which the bodies have after having been burned by sulfur, of what species they are, and what is their true nature. Because at the end of this test, the sun appears strongly orange or light red. The moon is black, intermingled with celestial blue. Jupiter is black with a little bit of red mixed in. Saturn is black, brown, with some red and lividity. As for Venus, if she has been badly burned by the sulfur, she appears after that black and very livid, but if she has been only slightly burned, it has a very clear color of a beautiful violet, which comes to it from the mixture of sulfur. But with regard to Mars, although it is much or little burnt, it always returns from this test very black and very obscure. One notices similarly the difference which is between the metals by putting them back in body, after they have been burnt by sulfur. For there are some who regain body, and others who, after having resumed it, being put in a violent fire, go away wholly or partly in smoke with the sulfur. Moreover, some of those who take bodies return to their same nature, and there are others who, after being thus burnt, come back and change into quite another body than the one they had before. Those who after this ordeal resume their same body are the sun and the moon. But Jupiter and Saturn evaporate, Jupiter or entirely wear almost everything, Saturn does not evaporate completely, but sometimes more and sometimes less. Moreover, this difference comes from the diversity of things and bodies, and from the different way of preparing them or testing them by this ordeal. For if, at the end of this examination, we put Jupiter back into the body, and we suddenly want to give it a very violent fire, it evaporates and is lost, whereas if we give fire little by little and by degrees, Saturn and Jupiter are preserved and maintained in their nature. It is true that the bodies that these two metals take up after that, do not seem to be their true body, but another quite different one. Experience having shown us that after this test, Jupiter changes as into a light regulus of antimony, and Saturn into a brown and dark regulus of antimony. That Venus diminishes, if it is made to take shape again by a strong fire, and Mars even more. But Venus, putting herself back into a body, becomes heavier than she was, and of a dark yellow color, which is a little like blackness, and she softens as she increases in weight. Thus one will be able to judge by these experiments of the nature of the bodies which will have been altered by the medicines. And it softens as it increases in weight. Thus one will be able to judge by these experiments of the nature of the bodies which will have been altered by the medicines. And it softens as it increases in weight. Thus one will be able to judge by these experiments of the nature of the bodies which will have been altered by the medicines. Chapter 41. Of calcination and reduction. We would have once again to speak here of the examination which is done by calcining the bodies or metals, by making them then take again bodies. But, because we have already treated very amply of these two things in the preceding book, we will content ourselves with saying that we have proved by experience, that even if we calcine the perfect bodies, and that we put them back into bodies, as much as we want, they will lose nothing for this of their perfection and their goodness, that is to say, they will lose nothing, neither of their color, nor of their weight, nor of their volume, nor of their luster. At least that is considerable. Whence we must draw this conclusion, that if by calcining and reconstituting several times the imperfect metals, whatever they may be, which will have been altered and changed by some medicine, if they fall from the goodness which they seem to have acquired by projection, it is certain that the medicines, which will have made this change, are only pure sophistications. So one must work to make experiences, in order not to be deceived. Chapter 42. Of the facility metals have in receiving quicksilver. I have shown before clearly that the bodies or metals which had a great deal of quicksilver were the most perfect, and that this was the reason why they attached themselves much better to quicksilver than the others. And it is certain, therefore, that those bodies which most eagerly receive and drink up quicksilver approach nearest to perfection, as testifies to us the great facility that the sun and the moon, which are the two perfect bodies, have in receiving it and attaching themselves to it. Whence it follows that any imperfect metal which will have been transmuted by some medicine, and which will not easily receive quicksilver into its substance, must be very far from perfection. Chapter 43. Summary of all art. After having spoken sufficiently of the experiments that can be made to examine the perfection of the Magisterium, and having consequently fulfilled what we promised at the beginning of this book, there remains nothing more for us to do, to complete our work, than to put in a single chapter all the accomplishment of this divine work, and reduce to a few words the process of the Magisterium which we have abridged in this Summa and dispersed into all the chapters which it contains. I therefore declare, that the whole work consists only in taking the stone, that is to say the matter of the stone, which must be sufficiently known by all the things that we have said of it in the chapters of this treatise, and by assiduous and continual work, give him the first degree of sublimation, in order to remove from it all the impurity that corrupts it. The perfection which sublimation must give to this matter, consisting only in making it become so subtle that it is raised to the ultimate purity and subtlety, that it finally becomes all spiritual and volatile. After which, it must be made so fixed by the manners of fixations that I have described, that it can resist the fire, however violent it may be, and remain without fleeing or evaporating, and this is the end of the second degree of the preparation that must be given to this matter. By the third degree, we complete the preparation for it completely. What is done by sublimating this stone, or this matter, and by this means of fixed that it is, making it volatile, then of volatile making it fixed a second time, dissolving it after having fixed it, and being dissolved making it still volatile, and refixing it all the same, so long as it is fusible, and transmutes the imperfects, and gives them the true foolproof perfection of sun and moon. Thus, by redoing the operations of this third degree, one increases the perfection of the stone, and one multiplies the virtue it has of transmuting imperfect bodies. So that it is only by continually redoing the same operations of the work that one gives the multiplication to the stone, by which one makes it so perfect that one of its parts will be able to convert into a true sun and a true moon 100 parts of imperfect metal, then 1,000, and so on increasing always until infinity. Chapter 44. How the author taught the art in this sum of perfection. But to remove any sort of pretext for the calumniators to accuse us of bad faith, and of not having acted sincerely in this treatise, I declare here first that in this Summa, I have not taught our science at once, but I have dispersed it here and there in various chapters. And I did it so on purpose, because if I had put it in order right away, the wicked, who would misuse it, would have learned it as easily as the good people. Which would be a completely unworthy and unjust thing. I declare in the second place, that wherever it seems that I have spoken most clearly and most openly about our science, it is there where I have spoken of it most obscurely, and where I have most hidden it. I have however never spoken of it by allegories or by enigmas, but I treated it, and I taught it in clear and intelligible words, having written it sincerely, and in the manner that I knew it, and that I learned it by the inspiration of God, very high, very glorious and infinitely praiseworthy, who condescended to reveal it to me, having only he who gives it to whom he pleases, and who gives it when he pleases. Not fear being able to learn such a marvelous science. For I assure you that you will undoubtedly discover it if you seek it, not by the reasoning of any other science you have learned, but by a movement and an impetuosity of spirit. And whoever seeks it by intelligence and the natural light of his mind, will find it. But whoever claims to learn it from the books should not hope to know it, except after having studied for a long time. For I further declare that neither the philosophers who preceded me, nor I, wrote our science only for ourselves, and for the philosophers our successors, and in no way for others, although, moreover, this science is very true and very assured. For me, although all the same I have only written for myself the way of seeking it, and of learning it, I can nevertheless say that what I have said about it, I did not say it only to excite wise and intelligent persons to apply themselves to the study of this science, but even that I have said enough to give them the means of seeking it by the only and the true way. And I can assure you that whoever will have a good mind, and who will apply himself carefully to understand well what I have said in this book, will certainly have the satisfaction of discovering an excellent gift of God, very high and very powerful. End of the second book, and of all Geber's Sum of Perfection.